Today's goal is 100 berries. You know the drill, smash that button to get that juicy fruit and hit subscribe for more amazing recaps. Now let's get into it. Fate takes a swing and earthquake hits. Jinho fumbles with some explosive materials, and bam, one-way ticket to the past. He wakes up in the body of a newborn, but not just any kid. His new life, luxury, baby. Turns out this family's got serious money and power. His dad's not just some noble either. He's the crown prince, future king of Ozen. Talk about being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Jinho's no dummy, though. He realizes quick that being crown prince means he can make some real moves. And while most royal kids are just learning how to talk, this guy's mentally over 30 and ready to take on the world. His first trick: skip all those boring royal lessons by impressing his dad, King Saiyang the Great. The same king known for supporting geniuses. Jinho rounds up the kingdom's best craftsmen and starts teaching them some critical skills from the future. Why? So he can sit back and reap all the benefits while everyone else does the hard work. But before all that, Jinho's got another problem to tackle. Palace hygiene is absolute garbage. One day, he's walking through the gardens when he smells something foul. Turns out, one of the palace maids straight up stepped in a pile of dung. Disgusted, he realizes ancient folks haven't exactly mastered the concept of cleanliness, and he's not about to let it slide. He calls out the mess and shuts down the palace's old-school teachers when they try to argue with him. Yeah, this modern-day kid has zero patience for their outdated ideas. But Jinho doesn't stop there. He starts questioning the kingdom's military tactics too, why are they still using horses and fabric armor when they could be way ahead of the game? His teachers, they're floundering, unable to keep up with his sharp logic. Soon enough, the palace scholars realize this kid's on another level, so they up the ante, throwing harder subjects his way. The plan? Slow him down. But come on, this is Jinho we're talking about. Time flies, and by the age of 7, Jinho's officially crowned as the crown prince. Sure, he's got the title, but the kid still doesn't have any real power yet. No worries, though, because he's already plotting his next big move. He's moving the whole dynasty into the future, one genius invention at a time. While strolling around the palace, he finds himself fascinated by the blacksmiths, watching them hammer out swords and shields. Ah, the smell of hot iron, he thinks, reminds me of home. So he strikes up a chat with the lead blacksmith, asking, "Hey, who's your best guy with steel and gold?" The blacksmith, taken aback by the sudden question, replies, "I've got someone, your highness." He sketches out a blueprint for a new pen that not only writes but holds ink inside. So no more messy ink pots. The blacksmith's confused but intrigued. "You want me to make what?" Jinho explains the whole concept like it's no big deal. "Trust me, it'll work. I need this thing to release ink smoothly, but not too much. Oh, and make the tip rounded so it doesn't flood the paper. You'll need to make a lot of these pens and fast, not over the course of a month. Since the pen tips will touch water, we'll use gold and silver instead of iron to prevent rust. We can hammer thin sheets and, if we get the molds right, crank out 20 pens a day." The blacksmith pointed to the drawing. "The main issue is the slit, right?" Jinho agreed, nodding. "The line should be as thin as a strand of hair. Think mechanical pencil tip about 0.5 millimeters should do." After some quick calculations, the blacksmith said, "Then I'll make the slit about 1 GI wide." Jinho's pumped. "If you can pull this off, we're about to change how writing gets done around here." 3 days later, right on schedule, the blacksmith returned with the finished product. "I've made 5 nibs, each with different line thicknesses. Please test them and choose the one you like best." Jinho attached a nib to the pen body, dipped it into ink, and made a stroke across the paper. As the pen glides over the paper, leaving a fine, elegant line, far exceeding his expectations, he couldn't hide his grin. "I love it," he said, as the 2 craftsmen stood by, stunned by their own handiwork. "You did a fantastic job," Harong praised, smiling with satisfaction. "It's all thanks to your guidance, your highness," the blacksmith replied, humble as always. After testing the nibs, Harong gave his order. "Make 100 more with this line thickness, and keep 10 of them in perfect condition." The blacksmith nodded immediately. "Of course, your highness." "Oh, and one more thing," Harong added, a glint in his eye. "Can you engrave plum blossoms on the nib of this gold pen?" Without a second's hesitation, The blacksmith replied, "Certainly, Your Highness." Hurong, excited, asked, "How long will that take?" The blacksmith confidently responded, "Just 10 days should do." Hurong, ever cautious, reminded him, "I'll give you 2 extra days, but there better not be any defects. I'm introducing this to my father." The blacksmith, Gong, bowed deeply. "I swear, there will be no defects, Your Highness. And one more thing," Hurong added, lowering his voice, "keep this project under wraps until I show it to my father." "As you command, Your Highness," Gong replied without hesitation. Once their business was done, Hurong left, and Li Changhe, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but remark, "His Highness is truly mature for his age." Gong nodded in agreement. "Yes, I've heard he's only just turned 8 this year, but the way he speaks and acts, it's like talking to someone in their 30s. Li Changhe grinned. "That aside, you must be realizing how great it is to be the best craftsman in Ozen now, huh?" Turns out, Gong had received a certificate of recognition personally awarded by Crown Prince Hurong, and he cherished it like it was pure gold. "I need to find a carpenter to make the best frame for this," Gong mused. "This is definitely something to pass down as a family heirloom." Days later, the nibs were completed, each intricately engraved with plum blossoms. When Emperor Young Nyan tried the pen, his reaction said it all. "This is truly remarkable," he said, admiration clear on his face. 10 out of 10. In the 3rd year of Sai Yong's reign, Hurong introduced the golden pen to the emperor, who, after testing it, couldn't stop praising it. "The wrist and arm feel so comfortable when writing with this pen," he marveled. "And even when writing quickly, it's beautiful. The Crown Prince has done something truly admirable." Hurong, staying humble, responded, "You're too kind, father." But the emperor wasn't done. "Historians must record this moment," he declared. The historian bowed deeply. "Yes, Your Majesty." The emperor gazed at the pen for a long while. "You've truly done something remarkable, Crown Prince." Then something caught his eye. "Is this a plum blossom?" he asked. Hurong quickly explained, "Yes, father. I had it engraved because it's the symbol of the royal family." The emperor's pride only grew. "Excellent. But tell me, how did you come up with this invention?" "Here it comes," Hurong thought, already prepared. "Well, one day when you were dipping your brush into the ink, I noticed something strange," he began, working his wits. "Strange?" The emperor raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Hurong continued. "The ink was absorbed by the bristles of the brush. Normally, water flows downward, but I saw the opposite. I couldn't help but be fascinated by it. And so, I set out to make this." The emperor was impressed. "Many have used brushes, but no one has thought like you. This is learning through observation at its finest." Hurong, seizing the moment, said, "Thank you for your kind words, father, but I do have a request." "Speak your mind," the emperor encouraged. "Eunuch," Hurong called. "Bring them here." The eunuch appeared, carrying a mysterious box. "Yes, Crown Prince." Hurong turned to the emperor. "Father, I'd like you to grant these gold pens to the historians and court ministers." The emperor, intrigued, asked, "All of these pens?" Hurong explained his plan. "The ministers and officials who need to write quickly should have these, and the historians, who record everything tirelessly, could use something to make their work easier." The room buzzed with surprise. No one had ever thought to consider the needs of the historians before. The emperor asked for everyone's thoughts. "I believe the Crown Prince's idea is excellent. What do you all think?" he asked. The ministers all nodded in agreement. "For someone so young to be thinking about the well-being of his officials, it's truly admirable," they said. Finally, the emperor gave his approval. "Distribute the gold pens to the historians and court officials," he ordered. The servants moved quickly. "Yes, Your Majesty." The whole court was filled with happiness, and the emperor couldn't stop smiling. "The Crown Prince truly has deep thoughts," they remarked, as Hurong basked in his success. Not long after, the golden pen Hurong created sparked a trend in Yoshin. By the 3rd year of Sai Yong's reign, everyone was talking about the golden nib pen. "Have you tried the Crown Prince's pen?" they asked. "Oh yeah, it's brilliant." Merchants buzzed with excitement. In the markets, deals were happening left and right, with customers testing the pens. "This golden nib pen is something else," one said, writing with it effortlessly. The shopkeeper grinned. The emperor himself promoted this beauty, plum blossom engraving and all. It's gorgeous, the customer added, admiring it. And it's so convenient. The shopkeeper, watching the customer leave, thought to himself, I smell profit in the air. But not all was smooth sailing. A few days later, during a court session, a minister reported, Your Majesty, there's been an unfortunate incident in the market. The emperor raised an eyebrow. Unfortunate? Speak. Counterfeit golden nib pens are being sold everywhere, the minister explained. The court erupted in outrage. How dare they forge such a valuable item, especially one bearing the royal symbol? Punishment must be severe, the officials roared. The emperor, thinking of Hurong, said, Let's consult the crown prince. He invented the pen after all. The eunuch called out, Summon the crown prince. A short while later, Hurong arrived. Father, you called? The emperor got right to it. The ministers say counterfeit pens must be severely punished. What are your thoughts, my son? Hurong bowed, furrowed his brow, and took a moment to think. All eyes were on him, waiting for his answer. Finally, Hurong spoke. Father, may I handle this matter? 1 month later, the crown prince made his move. He walked into the Ministry of Revenue holding up a pen. Everyone knelt down, bowing in unison. Your Highness, we greet the crown prince. Here's your rewrite using voice 1 at 75%, keeping it sharp, engaging, and with a bit of tension. One of the officials caught sight of it and immediately went pale. His face drained of color. No one dared to raise their heads. None of us would ever allow our guilds to commit such treachery, one of them blurted out. Another chimed in. My guild would never do such a thing. Hyung glanced at them, his expression cold. I didn't come here to accuse you. Stand up. Sweat dripped down their faces as their bodies trembled. Hyung's hand slammed down on the table with a sharp crack. His tone dropped, dark and commanding. Don't make me repeat myself. Stand up. Now. The officials, regaining their composure, shakily rose to their feet. Hyung sat down, speaking with authority. Let me cut to the chase. I plan to grant the production rights for golden nib pens and regular pens to one of your guilds. However, those producing golden nib pens will pay 20% of the profits to the court. Oh, and the market price for these pens cannot exceed 60% above production costs. One official, clearly nervous, spoke up hesitantly. Your Highness, forgive me, but there's a problem. A 60% margin sounds like a lot, but after wages for the makers and sellers, we're left with only 30%. If the court takes 20%, we're down to just 10%. Hyung's hand slammed the table again, his face darkening. Are you trying to lie to my face? The official's mouth snapped shut, fear written across his face. I said 20% of the 30% profit, which leaves you around 6%, not 10%. Hyung spat. Get this deceitful, money-blinded fool out of my sight, and revoke his guild's bidding rights. The man froze, stammering. Your Highness, please, I beg you. But his pleas fell on deaf ears as 2 soldiers dragged him out, ignoring his cries for mercy. The room was plunged into heavy silence, tension thick in the air. No one dared utter a single word. Hyung spoke again, his tone sharp but steady. Both His Majesty and I believe that the merchants and common folk of Ozan are vital. No one can achieve anything alone. Everyone needs help in life. He stood abruptly, his voice rising. But if any of you dare lie to me like that fool did, then you merchants will be worth nothing. The officials bowed deeply, speaking in unison. We will remember, Your Highness. With his point made crystal clear, the bidding process concluded without further scheming. Hyung, feeling a sly satisfaction curling at the corner of his mouth, called for his eunuch to meet him in private. You've done well, Hyung said with a smile. Your Highness, I wouldn't dare, the eunuch replied, a little puzzled. But why all this, Your Highness? Hyung sighed. You know, I'm still too young. I don't have many other choices. The eunuch nodded in understanding. Indeed. Well then, with your permission, I'll take my leave. Go ahead, Hyung replied, though inside, he was glowing with satisfaction. Good, very good. Everything is going smoothly. Just keep it up. One day, however, an official suddenly spoke up during court. Your Highness, I, Grand Chamberlain Sung have something to report, he said sternly. The emperor raised an eyebrow. Speak. Sung voice was firm, We can no longer proceed with the Crown Prince's plan. This was the first time Hyung had faced such blatant opposition. He turned to face the man, narrowing his eyes. Sung continued, "Your Majesty, since the Crown Prince's ascension, there's been nothing but praise for him. The treasury has grown, thanks to his initiatives, especially since the sale of the golden nib pens. Revenues are higher than ever before. The ministers have been overjoyed with the financial success." The emperor nodded in agreement. But, Sungam added, "Some of us are concerned. The court is showing too much favor to the merchants. How can the court become a place of business? The merchants may end up as the lowest class in society. But if we give them too much power, they'll think they can influence the throne." Hyung stood there listening carefully. But before the conspirators could make any further moves, tragedy struck. The emperor's father, Grand King Taejong, passed away on May 10th in the 4th year of Sejong's reign. The conspirators had to put their plans on hold. "We'll have to wait for the next opportunity," one of them murmured, and the rest nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Hyung threw himself into his studies. Day and night, books from Europe filtered through China into his hands. With his hands on his hips, a confident smile played on his face. "This should fuel my inspiration. But I can't claim all these ideas as mine, they'll grow suspicious." Hyung's face darkened. "I need to learn how to deceive them better." During a formal presentation, Hyung explained to the court, "That's why I believe we should adopt Indian numerals, what the Westerners call Arabic numerals. They would make calculations far more convenient." The Minister of Revenue, Kim Young, nodded after a moment of consideration. "I believe the Crown Prince is right. Indian numerals are indeed useful for numbers." Minister of Rights Hyo-do agreed as well. "I concur." With the agreement of the key ministries, the emperor made his decision. "Let the nation begin using Indian numerals starting next month. If the results are favorable, we will implement them nationwide." The court responded in unison, "We obey, Your Majesty." A short while later, the emperor rubbed his temples, clearly tired. "Crown Prince, I think you should hear this next matter," he said, gesturing for Hyung to step forward. Hyung, confused, stepped closer. "Yes, father," the emperor sighed, holding a letter. "The Emperor of Ming has sent word. He was very pleased with the golden nib pens and has requested an additional 10,000 as tribute." Hyung's mind whirred. The royal treasury wasn't exactly in great shape. But then an idea struck him. "Father, what if the court established its own guild?" The ministers were stunned. "A guild? How could that be?" Minister of Rights Hien protested. The emperor motioned for silence. "The Crown Prince has more to say. Continue." Hyung explained. "Since the Emperor of Ming has requested more pens, it's clear they are popular. With the vast population of the Ming dynasty, the number of literate people there must be many times greater than our own. If we establish a royal guild to control the production, we could meet this demand efficiently." The court was silent as Hyung laid out his plan. The emperor, impressed, nodded. "Let us proceed. A righteous king should live as simply as his people, finding joy in humility and building virtue." Hien's voice rose in frustration. "Are you saying we should take pride in poverty? Have you seen any commoners who want to live in poverty and call it virtuous? They are suffering. In the summer, they're scorched by drought. In the winter, they freeze. And in the spring, they starve. Do you think they'll praise the king's virtue while they die?" Hien took a breath, then said, "Father, the nobles and ministers may understand how to endure hunger, but the commoners do not. They lack the knowledge or the means. If we wish to educate them, we must first lessen their suffering. Don't you agree?" The emperor slammed the table again. "Exactly." The court watched in stunned silence as the emperor's passion matched Hien's. Hien thought to himself, "My father's getting a little too worked up. Time to stop." Hien spoke again, calming the room. "Throughout history, it's been said that the will of the people is the will of the heavens. Even if we maintain our virtues, what will the gods think of us if the people are crying out in misery? The people say, 'Man proposes, God disposes.' After we've done everything in our power, shouldn't we wait to see how the gods respond? Yet, whenever a drought or plague strikes, the ministers blame the king, claiming he's lost his virtue. Isn't that a contradiction?" Hien addressed the entire court. "Many of you have been officials since before this dynasty was founded. So, Why didn't you accuse King Taejo of losing his virtue when he established this dynasty while still a subject of the Goryeo kingdom? Or when my grandfather, King Taejong, raised his sword against his brothers? Or my father, did he lose his virtue when he took the throne instead of his elder brother, the rightful heir? At this, Grand Minister Sung cried out in panic. Your Highness, Crown Prince, we didn't mean. The Emperor raised his hand, silencing the court. The Crown Prince's words were harsh, but true. I hope the ministers will forgive him. He turned to Hien. Next time, be more careful with your words. Hien bowed deeply. I will, Father. The Emperor turned back to the ministers. But listen closely. The well-being of the people is the most important thing. The tribute to the Ming Emperor will proceed as the Crown Prince has planned. Everyone in the court bowed their heads in compliance. Yes, Your Majesty. The Emperor glanced at Hien. Do you have anything more to add, Crown Prince? I believe it's more reasonable to pay the people with food for their labor, rather than just handing out supplies, Hien said, his voice steady. The Emperor blinked, surprised. Pay them, you say? Hien dove into the details. Yes, while the lack of rain causes droughts, the absence of irrigation systems and water reservoirs is just as big of a problem. We need to prepare for future droughts by building reservoirs in every town and repairing the ones we already have. And I think we can mobilize the people to do this work, paying them in food. When King Sung's decree to send golden nib pens as tribute to Emperor Yongle was issued, a problem arose during preparations. What did you say? The Emperor asked, his tone sharp. They can't meet the production deadline? A court official stepped forward nervously. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the merchant guild responsible for producing the golden nib pens has reported they can't meet the production quota in time. Jin-ho, deep in thought, wasn't surprised. As I expected, with the current state of our workshops, it's impossible to meet that deadline. He stepped forward. Father, may I confirm something? Could I summon the representative of that merchant guild? Soong immediately interjected, his voice sharp. This cannot be allowed. How could we summon a mere merchant to discuss state affairs? The Emperor, calm but firm, responded, Grand Secretary, you knew what my answer would be. That's why you dared interrupt me, isn't it? Realizing he had overstepped, Soong stammered, Your Majesty, but the Emperor wasn't having it. I understand your loyalty, Grand Secretary, but instead of blindly rejecting everything, why don't you suggest an alternative solution? Soong bowed his head in defeat. I beg Your Majesty's forgiveness. The Emperor waved it off. Summon the merchant quickly. Soon, a merchant from the guild was brought in, kneeling before the Emperor. Your humble servant greets Your Majesty. The Emperor didn't waste any time. The Crown Prince has a question for you. Answer honestly. Yes, Your Majesty, the merchant replied, trembling. Jin-ho stepped forward. I've heard that your guild cannot produce the golden nib pens on time. Why is that? The merchant, clearly nervous, explained, Golden nib pens are delicate works of craftsmanship, Your Highness. We must focus intensely on each one. Even if we work faster, there are limits. Jin-ho inquired further. So, the entire process of making each pen is done by a single craftsman, correct? Yes, that's correct, the merchant confirmed. A skilled craftsman must make each pen, one by one. Jin-ho thought for a moment before turning to his father. Father, I have a solution, but I need to speak with the craftsman from the guild first. Before anyone could react, Soong immediately protested again. Your Majesty, first a mere merchant, and now the Crown Prince wants to summon a craftsman to this esteemed place? Please reconsider. The Emperor's patience snapped. Grand Secretary, be quiet. Why shouldn't I summon him? This concerns the affairs of the nation. Soong, still displeased, tried to argue again. Your Majesty, But the Emperor cut him off, his voice icy. If you continue to argue, I'll begin to question your loyalty. The room fell into a suffocating silence. No one dared to speak. Summon the craftsman, the Emperor ordered. Once the craftsman arrived, Jin-ho addressed him. I've heard that each craftsman handles every part of making the golden nib pens. Is that true? The group knelt and replied, Yes, Your Highness. Jin-ho nodded thoughtfully. I have a suggestion. Instead of having one person do everything, why not divide the tasks? One person shapes the nib, another forms it, and a third handles the engraving. What do you think? The craftsmen exchanged surprised glances. It might be possible, Your Highness, one said. We would need time to adjust, but once we're familiar with the new process, it should be faster. This is called the division of labor, Jinho explained. When multiple people work together, they can produce more, faster. The emperor was impressed. That makes sense. We will await good news from you. The craftsman bowed and left. Afterward, the emperor turned to Jinho, curiosity in his eyes. How did you come up with such a brilliant idea, Crown Prince? Jinho thought quickly, coming up with an answer. When I visited the kitchen, I saw the assistants and maids dividing tasks under the head chef's instructions. I remembered that and applied it here. The emperor laughed heartily. This child has a gift for seeing brilliance in things others overlook. What do the ministers think? The ministers nodded in agreement. The crown prince is very wise, Your Majesty. But, of course, Seoung had to chime in. I believe the crown prince is focusing too much on trivial matters. His sharp mind should be directed towards studying the teachings of wise men. The emperor's expression hardened. Why do you consider thinking and drawing meaning from things others overlook as trivial? Didn't the wise men do the same, pondering what's best for the nation and its people? Why are you so narrow-minded? Seoung, flustered, quickly responded. I only want what's best for the crown prince, Your Majesty. The emperor's anger flared. Is this like what the crown prince mentioned the other day? That you think I and my ancestors are unworthy of ruling? Is that why you speak such absurd things? Panic washed over Seoung's face. I would never dare think disloyal thoughts, Your Majesty. Please understand my intentions. In the back, another minister thought to himself. Sung's words were narrow-minded. Sure, but is it really worth the emperor suppressing him this much? Jinho, watching it all unfold, thought. Father's showing his true colors again. Later, back in the East Palace, Jinho closed the door behind him with a deep sigh. That was intense. What would have happened if I hadn't come up with the division of labor in time? Reflecting on it, he realized, Father's been calling for me more often lately. I only wanted a bit of attention, but now I'm in deeper than I expected. He paused, thinking, I didn't even realize the concept of labor division didn't exist in this period yet. Even before Adam Smith mentioned it, it was happening naturally. But turning it into an industrial principle, that was an agreement between monarchies and market policies. His mind raced. Roseon's monarchy is absolute in name, but it's more of a power struggle between the king and the officials. The people want a semi-republican government. A king who sides with the people over the officials would protect their interests and give them real power. He nodded to himself. Success won't come overnight. I'll have to build this step by step. First, strengthen father's authority, even in the remotest areas. And to do that, we need wealth. His decision made, he stood up. The treasury must be filled first. Jinho left the East Palace and headed for the main hall. The emperor looked up, surprised. Why have you come? I have something to discuss about the envoy preparing to visit the Ming dynasty, Jinho replied. There is something we need the emperor of Ming to confirm. The officials around them exchanged curious glances. What's the crown prince up to this time? Jinho repeated. There's something the emperor of Ming needs to confirm. The emperor, intrigued, asked, What's on your mind now? Jinho smiled, his calculations ticking away silently. The first step to filling the treasury is securing the monopoly on gold-tipped pens. We need to ensure that Roseon's merchants obtain exclusive rights to trade gold-tipped pens in the Ming dynasty. Jinho began. The emperor of Ming keeps demanding more of these pens from us, which shows they value them highly. The Ming dynasty is many times larger than Roseon, so their demand for the pens must be much higher. He continued. And next, every time the Ming envoy comes, they demand a massive amount of tribute from us. Therefore, we need to request an imperial edict limiting their demands. Jinho declared confidently. Sung, visibly agitated, interrupted. Crown Prince, that is impossible. The Ming dynasty views Roseon as a vassal state. How dare a vassal complain about the demands of its suzerain? That would be extremely disrespectful. Jinho shot back. How is it disrespectful? Does being from a larger country give them the right to bully smaller nations? Sung, flustered, tried to explain. That's not the point. If we suddenly reduce the tribute compared to what's customary, there will be serious consequences. Jinho, now irritated, thought, this old man is always opposing me. He then said aloud, do you know where all this tribute comes from? Isn't it the hard work of our people? And the amount of tribute the Ming dynasty demands keeps increasing, meaning the food for our people keeps decreasing. At this rate, even the taxes that fill our treasury will dry up. Shouldn't we address this before it becomes a disaster? Sung responded, this is because the crown prince still doesn't fully understand state affairs. The people in the envoy are all eunuchs, the closest servants of the emperor. If they speak ill of us, we could face grave danger. Jinho, now fuming, snapped, do you really think the emperor of the Ming dynasty is that foolish? Sung stammered, that's not what I meant. I just fear that your young age may lead to major losses in exchange for minor gains. Jinho's temper flared. What does my age have to do with anything? Didn't you just say we're risking great loss for small gain? Every time the Ming envoy comes, the tribute they demand blocks roads for miles. Isn't that wealth stolen from our treasury and our people? Jinho pressed further. Master Yoshins, the ancient sage, once said that a true official ensures the people can live in peace. Yet here you are, bowing and scraping to eunuchs. What does that make you? Sung, panicking, stammered. You're exaggerating, your highness. We aren't bowing down. I'm not finished. Jinho interrupted, his voice sharp. Mencius once said a righteous person, even living in luxury, still shows compassion. Even when seated in the highest position, they maintain their integrity and adhere to virtue. Now, flattering these eunuchs with gifts, does that align with these principles? If not, how dare you still call yourselves righteous? Then, in a surprising move, Jinho knelt down, pleading earnestly, Father, please allow me to lead this envoy. I will petition the Emperor of Ming to put an end to this wrongful custom. Grant me your permission. His voice filled with determination. He continued, it's true. I'm still young, only 9 years old, but my resolve is as high as the tallest mountain. The Emperor, rubbing his temples, sighed. The journey to Beijing is long and filled with dangers. The current situation in Joseon presents both a crisis and an opportunity, Jinho argued. If we act now, it could be the foundation for 1,000 years of development. But if we fail, we will remain small and isolated. Father, please understand my intentions. The emperor sighed again and gave a tired wave. Return to your palace. Eunuchs, escort the crown prince back to his chambers. He's too excited, calm him down. Jinho shouted in desperation. Please, father, let me go. I beg of you. Back in the East Palace, Jinho stormed in, shouting, everyone, get out. Damn it. I was too emotional. He sat down in the empty hall, brooding. That wretched Sung, he looks down on me because I'm young. Doesn't he? He's been nitpicking at me since last time. Just wait. I won't sit idly by. He called out, Eunuch, prepare for the journey to the Ming dynasty. The eunuch looked startled. What? Why all of a sudden? I said, prepare my things now. Meanwhile, back in the main hall, the officials were gathered, murmuring among themselves. We cannot act as the crown prince suggests, your majesty. Please, understand our concerns. The emperor sighed deeply. Do you know how much sleep the boy gets each day? Never more than 6 hours. A child of 9 years is already thinking about how to make this country prosperous, while all you can do is say no over and over. The officials, humbled, bowed their heads. Our sins deserve death, your majesty. Our sins deserve death. Suddenly, a servant rushed in. Your majesty, there's an urgent matter. The emperor looked up. What is it? The crown prince is preparing to leave. Everyone in the room froze. What? Where is he going? The emperor, alarmed, demanded. Where is the boy planning to go? The eunuch explained. It seems His Highness intends to leave for the Ming dynasty immediately. He said he cannot afford to delay even a moment if he truly cares for the country and its people. The emperor's patience snapped. He slammed his hand down on the table. Why is that boy so insolent? In a rage, the emperor stormed toward the crown prince's quarters, his footsteps echoing through the halls. Spotting 2 eunuchs leaving the chamber, he shouted, Hey, you two! Come here. The eunuchs rushed over, bowing respectfully. Your Majesty, we greet you. The emperor's eyes narrowed. Aren't you the eunuchs from the East Palace? Where are you going? One of them hesitated before stammering. We are headed to the Office of Records, Your Majesty. And for what reason? The emperor demanded, his patience wearing thin. The eunuch, trembling, stammered, Your Majesty, we've been ordered to record all the tribute items given to the envoys of the Ming Empire since the reign of the late King Taizhou. The emperor's temper flared. What? That insolent brat. His voice boomed as he whirled around, storming off. Scene shift to the empress's quarters. A servant rushed in, panting. Your Majesty, Empress, there's a major issue. The empress looked up in surprise. What is all this commotion about? The servant, panic in her voice, said. The crown prince is packing his belongings to leave for the Ming Empire. The empress gasped, alarmed. The crown prince is heading to the Ming Empire? Does he think it's a stroll through the village? Why is this happening? The servant quickly added. He said he's going to stop the envoys from demanding excessive tribute. The Ministry of Justice officials said he's overreacting, so the crown prince declared he'll go there himself, and the emperor is already on his way to the East Palace. Hearing this, the empress furrowed her brows, her face filled with tension and worry. Without hesitation, she hurried toward the East Palace, her mind racing. What on earth are you doing, my son? The servants, seeing her urgency, quickly followed, calling, Your Majesty, Empress! At the East Palace, the emperor, unable to contain his fury, pointed at the crown prince. You insolent child! What is this reckless behavior? Jinho, standing firm, replied, I am not being reckless, father. I'm doing what I must as the crown prince. Outside, the ministers stood in a line, too afraid to step inside. The emperor's furious voice echoed through the halls. You brat! Do you even know how old you are? How can you act like this? Jinho didn't waver. Age is not a barrier to doing what's right. It's just an excuse people use when they claim someone is too young to act. The emperor's face turned red with rage. Why are you acting so recklessly? Just then, the empress arrived, out of breath, calling out, Your Majesty! But the crown prince, still defiant, declared, If father is the parent of our people, then I want to be their older brother. Every time the envoys come, the people cry out in distress. As their elder brother, how can I remain silent? The emperor, enraged by his son's defiance, gritted his teeth. You insolent child! His voice thundered as he shouted, Steward, bring me the whip and the punishment bench. Gasps filled the hall. Outside, the ministers tensed, too scared to move. The empress rushed into the hall, her voice filled with panic. Your Majesty, the emperor, frowning, replied coldly. The boy is only 9, which is why he needs discipline. Your Majesty, he's only a child. The empress pleaded, her desperation clear. But the emperor was unyielding. This is not your concern, Empress. Eunuchs, escort her out. The empress, horrified, cried out, Your Majesty, please have mercy. Before the eunuchs could act, she made one last plea. Please! Each lash of the whip cracked through the air, landing hard on the crown prince's legs. With each strike, the emperor's voice thundered. Your first mistake, arrogance with your limited knowledge. Your second, disrespect to those who serve you. Jinho gritted his teeth, not making a sound, enduring the pain. Red welts covered his legs, but the emperor didn't stop. Your third mistake, disobeying your father's orders. Reflect on your actions and never do this again. Outside, the empress sobbed, her tears long dried. The ministers shifted uncomfortably, hearing the cries from within the hall. Finally, the doors opened. The emperor, breathing heavily from the punishment, stepped out. Call the royal physicians to treat the crown prince, he ordered. The servants responded immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. As the emperor passed by, he saw the empress, still weeping. Take care of him, he muttered coldly, then turned to the ministers. You all are more petty than a mere child. His words cut like knives. One of the ministers whispered, How could the crown prince act this way? Another, glancing at the empress nearby, warned, Quiet! She might hear you. But the empress, filled with anger, turned toward them. Why couldn't you think as thoroughly as the child? Why did you let things get this bad? I will never forget what happened today. The ministers, heads lowered, murmured, We are to blame. We deserve punishment. Later, in the Crown Prince's chambers, the Empress, while scolding Jin-ho, slapped his legs, though lightly. You little rascal. Why do you always make me worry? You can't behave like this. Jin-ho, lying face down, winced. It hurts. He thought to himself, why is it always my legs? In this life or the last, they always take the hit. Suddenly, he realized the slaps had stopped. The Empress, heartbroken, wept quietly, then bent down to embrace him. This mother has no one else but you, my child. Hearing this, Jin-ho whispered, I'm sorry, mother. Scene shift to the royal court. The emperor sat sternly, looking down at the officials gathered below. He turned to a eunuch and commanded, bring the documents the crown prince had you prepare. The eunuch quickly complied, presenting a stack of records. The emperor skimmed through them, his expression darkening. The smallest amount of tribute they take is equal to 2 months' worth of our annual treasury. The largest, 5 months. If we include the tribute from the smaller villages, we're talking almost an entire year's resources. He held up the documents. Do you see this? Ministers, look at the list of tributes we've sent to the Ming Empire. Year after year, the amount increases. What do you have to say for yourselves? The room was silent. The emperor's patience snapped, and he slammed his chair. Why don't you respond? Even the crown prince, a child, has thought about this. Yet none of you can. The ministers, bowing deeply, muttered in unison. We apologize, your majesty. The emperor's voice dripped with anger. Choose the envoy leader and assistants within 2 hours. If you fail to decide, I will charge you all with treason. The ministers, shaking with fear, replied, Thank you, your majesty, for your grace. Later that night, the emperor, gazing up at the moon, was lost in thought when the empress's voice broke the silence. Your majesty? He turned, asking, Is something the matter, empress? She hesitated. I stepped outside for some air. I couldn't sleep. The emperor nodded, waiting. Why did you punish the crown prince so harshly today? She asked, her voice filled with concern. It felt harsher than usual. The emperor was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. The crown prince is an intelligent child. The empress looked up, surprised. He's brilliant, the emperor continued. But sometimes, he becomes too absorbed in his own intelligence. Today, after facing opposition from the ministers, the emperor sighed. A tree that grows too straight will snap. Without the trust of the ministers, how can he care for the people properly? The empress stayed silent, watching him, waiting for more. I believe the crown prince was born with the qualities of a sage, the emperor continued. From now on, I'll teach him as best I can, guide him down the right path. The empress smiled softly. I can't fully grasp the depth of your decisions, but if this is what you aim for, I have no other wish. Now, Jin-ho sat, chin resting in his hand, sighing as he watched his 2 younger brothers playing in the courtyard, especially the one around his age. That boy was important. That boy Yu was his younger brother. And not just any brother, because in the near future, that boy would cause chaos within these very palace walls. Yu would grow up to be King Sijou, the 17th ruler of Yushan. And once he murdered the current ruler King Moonjong and his nephew, King Danjong, ascended to the throne, Yu would lead the Gaia's Hongnan rebellion, eliminating anyone who stood in his way. During his reign, he wouldn't stop there. He'd poison his own brother, Grand Prince Enpiong. The Gaia's Hongnan rebellion, Jin-ho mused to himself. A bloody coup from 1453, led by none other than Yu Prince Suyong to purge the allies of the sitting king. I remember my teacher telling me about this man. A prince who abandoned his younger and older brothers, betrayed his grandfather and father, casting a shadow over the prosperous era of the Joseon dynasty. Historians hated him. That innocent-looking brat running around the courtyard? He'd grow into a tyrant. Jin-ho pondered, what should I do? He had to act before Yu showed signs of becoming a monster. Suddenly, a wicked grin crossed his face. I've got it. That's how I'll change him. He approached his 2 younger brothers, a strange smile still on his lips. With careful education and everything I know, I'll make sure he serves me until his death. A shiver ran down Yu's spine as Jin-ho called out, Yu, Ian, good morning. Yu and Iam, the real names of his 2 brothers better known as Suyong and Anpyeong, bowed politely. Good morning, big brother. Jin-ho nodded warmly. I'm glad to see you both so happy. He turned to you. Your writing class starts soon, right? How about studying with me today? You looked confused, pausing for a moment. Why? Jin-ho hadn't expected the question, so he stammered. Why? Just curious to see how you're doing with your studies. But in his heart, he thought, soon enough you'll be working under me tirelessly. You won't have the luxury of being lazy like this. Yu furrowed his brow, clearly unimpressed with Jin-ho's reasoning. Without another word, he turned his back. I'll study on my own. Grabbing Ian's hand, he added, Come on, let's go. Don't play here anymore, you're bothering our elder brother. Though you didn't seem too upset, there was a hint of displeasure on his face as he led Ian away. Jin-ho's desperate attempt had failed for now. Time passed slowly into the afternoon. You eagerly ran toward the dining hall, excited for dinner. A maid trailing behind scolded gently, Young master, slow down. It's almost time for dinner. Running like that is dangerous. As they neared a corner, you overheard some servants whispering, and he stopped in his tracks, listening quietly. Isn't the crown prince amazing? One servant said. So young, yet he's already excelling in literature and aware of the country's major affairs. It's like he was born a prodigy. Yu's ears perked up. They must talk about me next, he thought. But the more he hoped, the more disappointed he became. The conversation shifted to comparisons. Well, the eldest prince is bright too, another servant said. But compared to the crown prince? It's like they were born to be compared. The words made you tremble with anger. The maid, finally noticing his expression, stormed over. How dare you speak like that? She yelled. Startled, the servants quickly bowed. We deserve death for this, they stammered. But before the maid could drag them off for punishment, you intervened. Let it go. Let's just leave. Though only a child, you already understood disappointment. His face remained calm, but inside, he questioned, What have I done to be lesser than my brother? Days later, Jin-ho gathered his two brothers in his private chamber, eager to strengthen their bond. Proudly holding up two self-made flashcards, he beamed. Tada! This is how this character is written. It's based on the sky and the earth. The cards, with one side showing a character and the other a drawing, were undeniably impressive. Ian, excited, shouted, Wow! Did you make these, brother? Of course, Jin-ho replied, grinning. I had the eunuchs help me make these. They're designed to make learning fun. Laughing inwardly, Jin-ho thought, I had the eunuchs make these memory cards in a day. Now we can memorize Chinese characters in no time. This will keep us closer. He waved the cards in front of you. Come take a look. But you, uninterested, declined. I already have a tutor. I don't need them. Jin-ho, confused, asked, Wouldn't it be more fun if we studied together? But before he could finish, you cut him off, sharp as a blade. I can manage on my own. He turned his back, ice in his voice. Please don't call me for things like this again. Jin-ho and Ian stood there, baffled, left with nothing but awkward silence. The next day, in the courtyard, Yu sat with his tutor, studying diligently. Meanwhile, hidden behind the bushes like a proper spy, Jin-ho crouched, eyes narrowed. This kid is harder to figure out than I thought, he mused. I need to see what he's up to every day. The tutor asked kindly, Don't you find this part difficult? You smiled, polite and smooth. No, your teaching method is very clear. I don't find it difficult at all. Jin-ho blinked in surprise. What? This kid was much nicer than he expected. Is he only difficult with me? The tutor continued. All right then. Let's review the 3 fundamental relationships and virtues of steadfastness from yesterday. You nodded. Yes, sir. Without missing a beat, he began reciting, his voice steady and confident. Loyalty of subjects to their ruler. The king is the overseer of his people. Filial piety of a child to their parents. The father is the guardian and disciplinarian of the child. Jin-ho's jaw practically dropped. What is this? He's much more advanced than I thought. You wasn't just well-behaved, he was a damn scholar. Is he only difficult with me? The kid had mastered the 1,000-character script, and now he was rattling off Confucian principles like he wrote the book himself. Suddenly, a memory hit him. His tutor once mentioned a rumor about Grand Prince Suyong. People said that, while Suyong wasn't quite as brilliant as King Moonjong, he was highly skilled in both literature and martial arts. The only problem? His older brother was a goddamn prodigy. But maybe Maybe there was more truth to that rumor than anyone thought. Jin-ho's gaze sharpened. What this kid needs is… That afternoon, Soo-young was in the middle of his swordsmanship training, his focus intense. As he swung his wooden sword at a training dummy, the loud thud startled him, and his grip slipped. The sword tumbled across the courtyard, landing right at Jin-ho's feet. Picking it up, Jin-ho asked, "Practicing martial arts, huh?" Holding a wooden sword of his own, he added casually, "Why don't you show me a few techniques? I've read the theory, but I've never actually practiced." Yu, slightly irritated but not refusing, swung his sword with practiced ease. "It's not that hard. Just do it like this." Jin-ho nodded, mimicking the movement. "Looks pretty tough, doesn't it?" He lifted his sword high. "Do I hold it like this?" But the moment he raised the sword, the weight yanked him off balance, and he tumbled backward, hitting the ground with a thud. "Ouch!" You couldn't help but call out, "Big brother!" Lying on the ground, Jin-ho sighed dramatically. "Just as I thought, it's not easy at all." He scrambled to sit up, rubbing his back. "I'd really appreciate it if you could teach your helpless big brother. I have no talent for this." He grinned. "Can you help me? I'm asking for a favor." Yu frowned, considering his brother's clumsy plea. After a long pause, his serious expression cracked, and he burst into laughter. "Why are you so bad at this?" Under the fading light of the setting sun, the two brothers grew closer, practicing their swordsmanship together. Jin-ho constantly exposed his weaknesses, deferring to Yu's superior skill. "Is this how you do it?" he asked, holding the sword all wrong. Yu shook his head. "No, you need to raise your hand higher." With that, Yu became more willing to let Jin-ho into his world, treating him with a warmth he hadn't shown before. Jin-ho smiled inwardly. The first step in changing the future tyrant has begun. One beautiful morning, two noblewomen sat together, enjoying a leisurely chat. The lady in pink leaned closer and whispered, "Have you heard about the memory cards the crown prince made?" The lady in blue nodded. "Oh yes, apparently they're quite useful." "Really?" the lady in pink asked, intrigued. The lady in blue smiled. "I've heard that studying has become much more enjoyable with those cards." The lady in pink began seriously thinking about the memory cards. "Do you think they could help my son learn Chinese characters more easily?" "Perhaps," the lady in blue said with a grin. Later that day, the lady in pink approached her husband, a court official. "Husband, I've heard the crown prince's memory cards are quite helpful." Her husband, looking surprised, asked, "How do you know about that?" "By chance," she replied, looking worried. "But shouldn't we try to borrow them for our son?" Her husband stroked his beard, unsure. "I'm not so sure." But she pushed harder. "Why don't you ask the crown prince to lend them to us?" The thought of an adult asking a child for something made him groan. "How would I save face?" His wife shot him a sharp look. "Is your pride more important than our son's education? This could affect the future of our family." As it turned out, they weren't the only ones interested in the memory cards. Several other families were curious too, and together, they requested an audience with the young crown prince. When they asked for the cards, Jin-ho played it cool, shaking his head. "Those cards were made for my younger brothers." The officials, desperate, pleaded, "Please, sell them to us. Price is no issue." Jin-ho sighed, pretending to give in. "If you really want them that badly, I suppose I have no choice." He held up 3 fingers. 3 sol, 159 kg of white rice. The price left the officials stunned. "What?" one of them stammered. 159 kilograms of rice? Jin-ho smiled, completely unbothered. "Yes, 159 kilograms. It's not that much, really." He explained, "Part of the cost covers the materials, another portion goes to the national treasury, and the rest is for my personal use." One official, looking confused, asked, "Your personal use? What for?" "Books," Jin-ho said matter-of-factly. "Books aren't cheap, you know." The officials exchanged glances before one of them finally caved. "Fine, I'll buy them. My wife's been nagging me about this anyway." With one official taking the lead, the rest followed eagerly. "I'll buy them too." Jin-ho grinned, satisfied. "All right then, it's a deal." Now that the money was flowing, Jin-ho was pleased. "I can finally get what I need," he thought. But there was another matter weighing on his mind, his father's health. Later, in the emperor's private quarters, a meal was being served. The emperor, eyeing the roasted meat in front of him, was about to dig in when a loud voice interrupted. "Father!" Startled, the emperor dropped his chopsticks. Jin-ho stormed in, looking serious. "Are you eating nothing but meat again?" Annoyed, the emperor grumbled. "What does this brat want now?" Inside the chamber, they began their usual back and forth. "Even a dog would be angry if its meal got interrupted," the emperor growled. "But eating healthy is key to staying strong." Jin-ho fired back. Outside, the eunuchs exchanged worried glances. "Should we intervene?" one whispered. "Let's wait for His Majesty's order," another replied. Back at the table, the emperor slammed the table in frustration. "What did you say about my meal? Not healthy? Look at it." He gestured to the dishes: roasted chicken, charred pork, and stir-fried beef. "It's all meat." Jin-ho frowned, picking up the plates. "Exactly. It's all meat. Where are the vegetables?" The emperor, caught off guard, stammered. This brat. This had become a regular argument. Ever since Jin-ho started obsessing over his father's diet, he'd sneak into the emperor's chambers with books in hand, lecturing him on balanced meals. Too much salt. Redo this dish. Less meat. He even began giving instructions to the kitchen staff. At every meal, Jin-ho would sit next to his father, nagging about the dangers of an unhealthy diet. Too much meat thickens your blood. Thick blood stresses your body. And when your body is stressed, what happens? It affects your health. And if you're not healthy, how can you run the nation? The emperor's patience was wearing thin. The servants, seeing his growing irritation, braced themselves. And, as expected, the emperor finally exploded. "You brat! I've been patient with you because you're still young. But I've had enough." He pointed at Jin-ho and yelled, "Stop interfering with my meals. Even a ghost deserves to die happy, with a belly full of meat. Take him out of here now." Jin-ho, helpless, was dragged out, calling out, "Father!" As he stood outside, he thought to himself, if this keeps up, the old man's going to fall ill. I have to keep him healthy or else my future won't be as comfortable as I planned. Still deep in thought, Jin-ho heard the emperor yell from inside, "Bring me more meat." Suddenly, an idea hit him. That's it. He rushed off to the palace woodworking shop, setting his plan in motion. The craftsmen were kept busy, working day and night to meet Jin-ho's demands. "It needs to be rounder," Jin-ho insisted. "Yes, Your Highness," the craftsmen replied, working tirelessly. They wondered why the crown prince was so fixated on making this strange item, but they dared not question him. After much effort, they presented the final product. "It's done, Your Highness." Jin-ho tested it, but it broke with just a little pressure. Furious, he shouted, "No! Make it stronger. Do it again." Days later, Jin-ho appeared before the emperor and the court officials, holding his new creation. The emperor sighed. "What now?" Jin-ho approached with a grin. "Father, I made this for your health." He held up his creation. "It's a jump rope." The emperor squinted at it. "A jump rope? How is this supposed to help my health?" Jin-ho smiled. "This is part of my grand plan to keep you fit." With great enthusiasm, Jin-ho explained the benefits of his new invention, demonstrating how to use it in front of the entire court. He jumped up and down with the rope, his breath quickening as he finished. "That's how you do it?" the emperor, still confused, asked. "And how exactly is this supposed to make me healthier?" Jin-ho beamed. "Trust me, father, once you try it, you'll see. Isn't it just regular jumping? Are you saying this will make me healthier?" the emperor asked, his brow furrowed. Jin-ho, ready to defend his invention, held up an English book. "Yes, father. According to Western scholars, people who sit around too much often have weaker lower bodies. But," he added with a sly grin, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "it says here that jumping rope strengthens your legs." The court officials perked up as Jin-ho leaned in closer, throwing in a bit of mystery. "And there's another benefit." The officials hung on his every word. Jin-ho feigned innocence, playing the part of the clueless child. "It's good for men," he said, struggling to explain further. "But I'm not sure how to put it into words." Bullseye. The moment he hinted at that other benefit, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Men who had been uninterested now sat forward, listening intently, including the emperor. "Is that true?" the emperor asked, suddenly serious. Jinho nodded enthusiastically. Yes, father. I'm sure of it. The emperor seemed conflicted. It looks odd, but it doesn't seem that different from regular jumping. He paused, thinking about the hinted benefit. And you're saying it's good for that? Jinho nodded again, pointing to the bell hanging around his neck. Yes, father. Just follow the rhythm of the bell. The emperor, still unsure, called out to a servant. Steward. An elderly man stepped forward, bowing. Yes, your highness? Jinho removed the bell and handed it to the steward. Put this on the emperor. When father jumps, you count 100 jumps, according to the sound of the bell. The steward respectfully replied, Understood. With a more emotional tone, Jinho said, Father, I want you to live a long and healthy life. The emperor couldn't refuse. He reluctantly moved to an open area in the courtyard to practice. Jinho, delighted, said, Father, let me tie the bell on you. The emperor looked incredulous. Do I really have to wear this? Yes, father. You need it to keep the rhythm, Jinho explained as he tied the bell around his father's neck. The emperor hesitated. But this makes me look a bit like a pig, doesn't it? Jinho, not having considered that, burst into laughter, so much so that he spat out his drink. The emperor, now irritated, asked, What are you laughing at? Nothing at all, father. All right, let's begin, Jinho said, struggling to suppress his laughter. The emperor, still unsure, swung the rope and attempted a few jumps. However, after just a handful of jumps, his lack of exercise became evident and he was quickly out of breath. Steward, how many jumps was that? The emperor asked, breathing heavily. The steward, honest as ever, replied, 9, your majesty. The emperor was shocked. Only 9. He turned to Jinho, hoping for mercy. Since it's my first time, shouldn't we lower the number of jumps? Jinho crossed his arms and shook his head firmly. No, father. You have to keep trying. You must aim for more. I'll stay until you reach 100 jumps. The emperor groaned internally at his son's determination, feeling as though this challenge might bring him to tears. As time passed, news of the emperor's jump rope routine spread through the palace. One day, a group of officials gathered, whispering among themselves. Did you hear? One official asked, rushing over to the group. The emperor just coughed. Doesn't His Majesty usually cough around this time? One of the royal physicians asked, puzzled. The man, looking more serious than ever, replied, That's not the point. Right after he coughed, he ran straight for the plum blossom chamber pot. For context, the plum blossom chamber pot was reserved specifically for the emperor. This was shocking news because ever since he began his jump rope routine, King Taeyong's health had improved dramatically. Where he used to have a bowel movement only once every 3 days, now he went every day. The palace maids had even congratulated him on his newfound health. And rumor had it, the emperor had been staying up later to handle court documents and making more frequent visits to the queen's quarters. Have you heard? One of the officials whispered. The emperor has been jumping rope, and now he uses the chamber pot right after he coughs. His complexion has even improved. Another official nodded. It all seems to be connected. The group sighed, sharing their own health concerns. These days, I've been feeling under the weather. Same here. I haven't been sleeping well at all. My wife's been complaining every night. The men exchanged knowing glances. Later that afternoon, Jinho was quietly studying when a distressed voice called out, Crown Prince! Startled, Jinho looked up to find all the court officials approaching him, desperation clear on their faces. What's going on? Jinho asked, confused. The officials wasted no time. Can you make more jump ropes? Please? You can ask for as much rice as you want, we'll pay. One official blurted out. Another chimed in. I need one for myself, and one for my wife and children, too. The scene turned chaotic, like a classroom full of preschoolers. As the officials began talking over one another, Jinho raised his hands to quiet them. Please, one at a time. The success far exceeded Jinho's expectations. He hurried back to the woodworking shop, instructing the workers, We have a lot to do. From now on, everyone is assigned a specific task. One person will make the ropes, another the handles, and someone else will take care of the bells. The workers, their eyes welling with tears, muttered to themselves, Crown Prince exploiting labor. Jinho didn't stop there. Now make 500 more. he ordered. In their hearts, the workers despaired. Please just kill us already. We're human too. But Jin-ho wasn't finished. He pulled out another design and handed it to a servant. Take this to the royal tailors, he instructed. The servant, bewildered, asked, What is this, Your Highness? Jin-ho explained. It's uncomfortable to jump rope in skirts. So, to make it easier for people to move, I've designed these exercise pants. Jin-ho's inventions sparked a revolution in the health of the court families. Now, entire households jumped rope together. Husbands grew healthier, wives were happier, and families across the nation praised the crown prince. This small thing has made such a big impact, they said. The crown prince is truly a genius. Not only were the families happier, but Jin-ho also reaped the rewards, collecting rice from the officials and happily storing it in his private warehouse. Standing before the massive stash of rice, Jin-ho crossed his arms and laughed loudly. I'm earning money even faster than I thought, but it's still not enough. I want more. With all the praise, however, came some criticism. Old-fashioned officials began to murmur. These inventions of the crown prince have made him quite famous. I hear he even sells them to high-ranking ministers. One official pointed a finger and commented, Hoarding money isn't something a wise person should do. We cannot stay silent about this, another added. But a senior official urged them to calm down. Let's wait for the right moment. From small things, big things grow. If the crown prince grows arrogant, he'll bring about his own downfall. As time passed, the day finally came for the envoy to depart for Beijing, marking another chapter in Jin-ho's journey. So livestock farming is more common than crop cultivation here. Haiyang questioned the farmers kneeling before him. Yes, Your Highness, one of the farmers replied. Haiyang continued. And which of you has never had smallpox? Raise your hand. A farmer in a brown tunic raised his hand. That would be me, Your Highness. Haiyang asked further. Have you ever contracted smallpox since you started raising cattle? No, Your Highness, the farmer responded. I've been this way since before I came to Niobian Island. Curious, Haiyang asked. Has Niobian Island ever had a smallpox outbreak? The farmer replied. Yes, Your Highness. We see at least one case every year before the cold season. Haiyang, confused, asked, Then why hasn't anyone here contracted smallpox? The farmers were silent for a moment before one answered. Well, to be honest, our doctor and landowner don't believe in it, but we know of a secret method to prevent the disease. Hearing this, Haiyang's face lit up. I knew it. He recalled Edward Jenner, the man who invented the first smallpox vaccine. Jenner's discovery stemmed from observing that those who contracted cowpox didn't get smallpox. After numerous experiments, Jenner saved humanity through vaccination. Haiyang asked the farmers, Does anyone here know this secret method? A man in white stepped forward. I do, Your Highness. Can you perform it on me? Haiyang asked. Shocked, the farmer stammered. What did you say, Your Highness? I want you to use that secret method on me. Haiyang insisted, holding out a needle. The farmer, horrified, exclaimed, Your Highness, are you serious? At the royal palace, the emperor was seated, listening to his minister's reports. Our finances are tight. We need to raise taxes. There's no other solution, one minister said, his face tense. Suddenly, a steward came running in, panicked. Your Majesty, there's a serious problem. The emperor, calm, asked, What's the matter? The steward leaned in and whispered, It's about the crown prince. The emperor's calm demeanor shattered. What? Is that true? Where is the crown prince now? The ministers, startled by the emperor's reaction, exchanged confused glances. What's happening? The steward continued. The crown prince has just returned to the palace. Immediately, the emperor rushed out in panic. Haiyang! Haiyang! He shouted as he ran through the halls. Seeing the emperor's urgency, the ministers hurriedly followed. Haiyang, where are you? The emperor called. Finally, he spotted Haiyang in the distance and ran over, shouting, Haiyang! Startled, Haiyang turned to see his father rushing toward him. Father? What's wrong? Panting and out of breath, the emperor grabbed his son by the shoulders. Are you hurt anywhere? No, father. What's going on? Haiyang asked, confused. The emperor's face darkened. Explain this to me, he demanded of the steward. The steward stammered nervously. Your Majesty, I only repeated what Eunuch O said. The emperor barked. Eunuch O, what is going on? Eunuch O dropped to his knees. Your Majesty, I swear I didn't lie. Are you mocking me? The emperor shouted. At that moment, Hyung spoke up. Father, it's about Niobian Island. Niobian Island? The emperor asked, confused. Hyung explained. It's just a misunderstanding. I found a way to fight smallpox. The emperor recognized the name of the disease. Smallpox? Yes, father. I inoculated myself with smallpox pustules from a cow, Hyung said proudly. Upon hearing this, the emperor's face turned white. You did what? Unable to process the shock, the emperor fainted. Father, wake up, Hyung cried, while the ministers hurried to help. After the shock, the emperor finally regained consciousness, staring at Hyung in disbelief. You injected cow pus into your body? Yes, father, Hyung replied calmly. Still in shock, the emperor asked, Do you even know what pus is? Hyung laughed and answered, Yes, father. It's the ooze from the cow's wounds. The emperor, trying to contain his fury, asked, So this procedure it's only on your skin, right? No, father. I used a needle to inject it into my body. Hyung responded bluntly. The emperor, now livid, grabbed Hyung by the shoulders. You reckless child. Just because it's written in a book doesn't mean you blindly follow it. Father, I'm fine. An experienced person performed the procedure on me, Hyung explained. The emperor, astonished, asked, Who? Hyung pointed. Him. A terrified farmer bowed deeply. The emperor, incredulous, asked, A cattle herder? Yes, father, Hyung replied. He knows how to prevent smallpox. It's been passed down for generations. King Sejong, still incredulous, asked, You used yourself as a test subject? Yes, father. There's no nobility or commonness when it comes to life and death. If I can prove this works, we can save the nation, Hyung said with determination. King Sejong, moved by Hyung's words, stood silently for a moment. He sighed, deep in thought. This child, will he be a blessing or a curse for this kingdom? Afterward, the emperor ordered, Guards, take this man to prison. If anything happens to the crown prince, his life will be forfeit. But if he speaks the truth, he will be rewarded. Meanwhile, the Grand Inspector was speaking with the royal astronomer. Did you hear? The crown prince injected himself with cow pus to fight smallpox. Lytron, the astronomer, replied, It sounds unbelievable, but if it's the crown prince, he must have his reasons. At that moment, the crown prince was lying in bed, burning with a fever. Yet he insisted, I'm fine. One servant angrily muttered, That cattle herder is responsible for this. In the prison, the warden yelled at the farmer, You endangered the crown prince. Confused, the farmer calmly explained, The fever will pass in 5 days. After 10 days, he will recover completely. Indeed, after 10 days, Hyung recovered fully. Later, Hyung proudly stood before the emperor. Look, father, I've overcome smallpox. Still skeptical, the emperor replied, I need more proof. Let me go to a place where smallpox is spreading, and I'll prove it works, Hyung suggested. But the emperor immediately refused. No, absolutely not, King Sejong replied firmly. But Hyung pressed on. Then how about this, father? Let's use this method to treat people in areas where smallpox outbreaks are occurring. I'm confident that once the treatment is properly explained, those who receive it will be cured. Suddenly, the Grand Inspector interrupted. We cannot proceed with this, Your Highness. This might just be a coincidence. Furthermore, isn't the Crown Prince's method essentially forcing people to undergo this treatment? Hyung remained silent for a moment before replying calmly. Grand Inspector, this is what So-ID-Do and his family have been doing for decades. How can you call this a coincidence? And since we're planning to accept voluntary participation, there's no element of force here. He continued, Everything in this world advances through trials and experiments. If we don't overcome our fear of failure, what will become of our kingdom? Hearing this, the court fell silent. The Grand Inspector clicked his tongue in frustration but said nothing more. Following Hyung's suggestion, the areas most affected by smallpox outbreaks were prioritized, and the treatment began. Those most afraid of smallpox eagerly volunteered, and soon the effectiveness of the method became apparent. Alongside the vaccination campaign, King Sejong ordered a population census to further verify the method's success. When the results were confirmed, King Sejong allowed the treatment to spread throughout the kingdom. One day, while Hyung was walking, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Hyung, look, do you know what this is?" It was his sister, Hyung Soo. "It's Soo Goa, traditional Korean sweets," Hyung responded. Hyung Soo smiled. "Correct. To reward you, I'll perform a little show with these." She wasn't particularly skilled at playing instruments, but Hyung endured, listening patiently. She teased, "You shouldn't sit around studying all the time. You need to appreciate the arts. Have you gained a little weight recently?" Before Hyung could respond, someone came to fetch her. "Princess, it's time to go." Hyung Soo waved goodbye. "See you later, Hyung." Watching his sister's happy figure walking away, Hyung smiled and thought, "Still, it's good to see her healthy, sister." With the smallpox issue mostly resolved, Hyung turned his attention to policy planning. He organized medical records into a book summarizing traditional Korean remedies and agricultural techniques. He even proposed drawing new maps and writing another book on farming methods suited to Joseon's climate. His proposals touched various fields, earning him the nickname the Sleepless Road of the Six Ministries due to his relentless work. Night had fallen, and King Sejong, gazing at the starry sky, was lost in thought. He dismissed his guards, saying, "Don't follow me anymore. I want to have a private conversation with my son." As Sejong approached Hyung's quarters, he noticed the lamps were still lit. A court official stepped forward and reported, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince often stays up until 1 a.m., sometimes even 3 a.m. So young, and working so hard?" The Emperor mused. Inside Hyung's quarters, the Crown Prince was deep in his studies when he heard the announcement of his father's arrival. He quickly put down his pen to greet him. "Father, what brings you here so late?" Hyung asked. "I noticed your lights were still on, so I came by. What are you working on so late?" Sejong inquired. "I'm reading a book, father," Hyung answered. "Is it a Western book? What's it about?" The Emperor asked, curious. "It's called The Art of Alchemy. It's about turning metals like iron or lead into gold using various methods," Hyung explained. The Emperor stroked his chin. "Turning iron into gold? Is that possible?" Hyung admitted, "Unfortunately, according to the book, it's not. But alchemy laid the foundation for modern chemistry through its experiments." Intrigued, King Sejong asked, "Let me see that book." Hyung handed him the book, and Sejong skimmed through it, remarking, "I was curious about what Western writing looks like." A few hours later, Hyung was stifling yawns, ready to sleep, but Sejong remained engrossed in the book, studying the Western letters. "Father, aren't you tired? You're so focused," Hyung asked. The Emperor, still captivated, commented on the letters. "Western script is fascinating." Hyung couldn't quite see the appeal, but his father called him over, pointing to the text. "See? Based on how this word appears in different places, it seems like it refers to the subject of the sentence. Look at how the letters change depending on their arrangement." Hyung thought, this man is a genius. No, a monster. He's figured out Latin structure in just a short time. "Isn't that right, Hyung?" the Emperor asked, snapping Hyung out of his thoughts. "Yes, father, that's correct," Hyung replied. The Emperor continued, "These Western letters are so different from Chinese characters. They look alike, but their meaning shifts based on arrangement. It makes me wonder, what if we created a writing system specifically for Joseon?" Hyung's eyes widened in surprise. "Father, I've thought about this too. Many people can't even write a petition because they don't know Chinese characters. We need our own system." The Emperor hesitated. "But if I announce this, the Hall of Worthies will immediately oppose me." The Hall of Worthies, Hyung thought. It was an institution Sejong had established for research, but it was heavily influenced by Confucian scholars. He replied, "If you explain this properly, father, it will go smoothly." The Emperor smiled. "It seems you've always found writing characters difficult, haven't you?" Hyung smiled awkwardly but thought, "It really is hard." The Emperor reminisced. "I remember the first time I wrote a poem, it took me hours, and your grandfather laughed when he saw it." Standing, the Emperor said, "It seems I've stayed too long. You should rest now." Hyung bowed. Yes, father. You should rest too. Joseon needs you to be healthy. The next morning, Hyung stood before the royal court and addressed his father. The 6 ministries need to be fully separated, and their records organized by task. Chronological records are too inefficient for future generations. The emperor turned to the court. Does anyone have a different opinion? The officials responded, We agree with the crown prince. The emperor concluded, I think it's a good idea. From now on, ministers must organize records according to the crown prince's instructions. The court responded in unison, We obey, your majesty. However, not everyone was pleased. The grand inspector and grand historian walked together, grumbling. The crown prince is even interfering with record-keeping now. We're the ones doing all the work, the grand historian complained. Exactly. This just doubles the work. At this rate, he might undo everything he's worked to build. The grand inspector agreed. But another voice interrupted. That will never happen. Chief Minister Ryu Yunhyun stepped forward, warning, If the crown prince crosses the line and ruins what we've built, even though he's the crown prince, I won't stand idly by. It's said their wages are so low they can't even support their families. Hyung explained, his voice steady but passionate. As a result, many have had to take on extra jobs or leave their positions to become tenant farmers or pursue other crafts. If the workload increases and management becomes stricter, more workers will quit. Ryu Yunhyun frowned, then quickly interjected. This problem arises because those workers are simply lazy. Workers in military factories and royal workshops receive the 9th rank and corresponding wages. Few ever resign from those positions. So the lack of money isn't an excuse for their laziness. Hyung's brow furrowed, his anger rising. Are you not aware that those officials also receive additional, unofficial benefits? He gestured pointedly. Even at your residence, Lord Ryu, guests arrive from dawn, and your house is always filled with visitors. Ryu Yunhyun remained unmoved. That's just gratitude gestures of goodwill. Hyung immediately countered. I'm not saying that's wrong, but if we continue to ignore the efforts of the paper craftsmen, how can they dedicate themselves fully to their work? If things continue like this, not only will we fail to advance our technology, but Joseon's papermaking skills will disappear along with these craftsmen. King Sejong, his expression thoughtful, nodded slowly. The crown prince is right. But Ryu Yunhyun wasn't done. His tone grew more severe as he challenged. Does the crown prince know that King Taejong established the paper mill because of inconsistent quality in the paper collected for currency? If we abolish the mill, we will face that same issue again. I urge the crown prince to reconsider. Caught between the two arguments, King Sejong looked conflicted. What should we do now? He wondered, casting a glance at Hyung, who gave his father a subtle but knowing signal. You know what to do, father. I trust you. Sejong, turning back to Hyung, asked, What do you think? Hyung sighed, reflecting on how often Sejong had been passing difficult decisions to him lately. Have the ministers forgotten about the gold-nibbed pens? Hyung's voice cut through the tension. We clearly outlined the standards 3 cha wide, 2 cha high. The paper must not be too rough, and its color must resemble peach blossoms. We hire craftsmen to meet these standards, offering them the lowest price. Ryu Yunhyun hesitated. But what about the costs? Hyung leaned in, determined to persuade the court. Let me use the gold-nibbed pens as an example. If we recognize these craftsmen as royal merchants, it will boost their businesses. The court can then collect taxes from their profits, earning more than the initial costs. Furthermore, competition will force Joseon's paper quality to improve, attracting even more traders from the Ming dynasty. The room fell silent as the officials absorbed his reasoning. Then, a voice broke the stillness. In my opinion, the crown prince's proposal seems reasonable. It was the Minister of Revenue. He continued, The Joseon dynasty has been established for almost 3 years now, and this issue has never been fully resolved. If we have a solution that will lower costs, why not implement it? But Ryu Yunhyun's voice cut through again, this time sharper. Minister of Revenue, be careful with your words. Have you forgotten that everyone must follow the teachings of the sages for the nation to remain peaceful? Turning to the king, Ryu Yunhyun declared, Your Majesty, the crown prince's suggestion might be correct, but it is only a temporary fix. For lasting peace and prosperity, we must focus on the moral education of the people. Suddenly, another official spoke up. Your Majesty, what the Grand Inspector just said is nothing but theory. How can the people understand the teachings of the sages if they're constantly suffering in poverty? Education is important, but people need to eat before they can learn. The debate grew heated, ministers firing back at each other. Amidst the chaos, Hyung smirked to himself. Interesting. Maybe I should invent popcorn for moments like this. As King Sejong raised his hand to quiet the court, Hyung thought, don't tell me he's going to put this on me again. Enough! Sejong's voice echoed. Yes, education is crucial, but so is ensuring the people's livelihood. I expect you all to come up with solutions that address both. No one dared object. The ministers bowed their heads in unison. We will follow your Majesty's orders. King Sejong continued, regarding the paper mill, the Crown Prince's proposal is valid, but shutting it down immediately may not be the best approach. Find a more comprehensive solution and report back to me. The officials bowed again. We will comply. After issuing his commands, Sejong turned to Hyung. Crown Prince, listen carefully. Yes, father, Hyung responded respectfully. I know you care deeply about the kingdom's prosperity and the people's well-being. It is your duty to be concerned with such matters, and I won't reprimand you for that. In fact, I commend you. Hyung bowed his head, though inwardly he thought, I just got scolded again. But, Sejong continued, his tone more serious, each time you speak, there are always people who oppose your ideas. That's a problem. You need to explain your political philosophy clearly when presenting your ideas. The words political philosophy sent a shiver through the room, and Ryu Yunyun's expression darkened. Sejong pressed on. You will do this in front of all officials of rank 3 and higher. Can you do it? Hyung's excitement grew. So father wants me to give a full presentation? Yes, father, he replied confidently. I only need 5 days to prepare. After the assembly ended, the ministers exchanged anxious whispers. A child with a political philosophy? One muttered. I can't understand what His Majesty is thinking. Another added, no matter how brilliant the Crown Prince is, he's still just a boy. Even with all the preparation in the world, how can he convince the ministers? But Ryu Yunyun, ever calculating, interjected, no, we must prepare ourselves thoroughly. Don't forget, the Crown Prince's ideas reflect His Majesty's thinking as well. That's true, another minister agreed reluctantly. His Majesty has never opposed the Crown Prince's ideas. Yunyun nodded gravely. Exactly, so we must prepare carefully. Remember how we built Joseon. We can't let the Crown Prince undo everything. Meanwhile, Hyung was deep in thought. They'll look down on me because I'm a child. Fine. I'll show them what I've learned from 21st century capitalism and modern management. Without wasting time, Hyung began his preparations. Eunuch, take me to the Bureau of Graphics and the weapons storage. The eunuch followed, thinking, what will the Crown Prince come up with this time? 5 days later, the main hall was packed with ministers and officials, all waiting for Hyung's presentation. Some muttered among themselves, wondering why they had been called for this. Others were dismissive, thinking it was a waste of time. The announcement came, His Majesty, the King, has arrived. King Sejong entered and took his seat. You are all here to listen to the Crown Prince's political philosophy. I hope you'll guide him wisely. As Hyung confidently stepped forward, servants behind him carried mysterious items, piquing the curiosity of the officials. Hyung bowed and thanked his father for the opportunity. Now I will begin presenting my political views, Hyung said. The room fell silent as everyone focused on him. Hyung clapped his hands, and a reform petition for the household staff was opened. He grabbed a loudspeaker and said, 1, 2, can everyone hear me clearly? The room was stunned, whispers rising. What is that thing? Undeterred, Hyung began. Thanks to the opportunity granted by my father, I can now meet all of you ministers. Let's begin. As Hyung laid out his political philosophy, complete with diagrams, he spoke with confidence, outlining the foundations for reforms in government structure, education, and taxation. Ministers were left speechless, some astounded by the Crown Prince's revolutionary ideas. Just as I thought, many of them reflected the Crown Prince is a mad genius. As Hurong observed the minister's expressions, he couldn't help but feel a smirk rise on his face. If you're surprised now, you've got no idea what's coming next, he thought to himself. There's a long way to go before I can really have my fun. In the grand hall of Manhwa, the young prince had just completed his presentation. The elderly ministers around him were left in stunned silence, astonished by the sheer intellect displayed by a mere 9-year-old. Even Junin, a seasoned official, had to admit, it's truly remarkable. Did you come up with all of that yourself? Hurong, ever humble, shook his head. No, father. I referenced the classics of wise sages and supplemented it with some ideas from Western books I've read. The elder man, feeling slightly outpaced, replied, You brought up many points I hadn't even considered. While many systems have changed since the founding of the Joseon dynasty, there are still many traditions that remain unchanged. Father, Hurong replied respectfully, you give me too much credit. The Westerners have a saying, new wine should be put into new bottles. It's been 35 years since the founding of the Joseon dynasty, yet the people still suffer. I believe it's time we consider reforms for the future of everyone. His words echoed through the chamber. Yes, Hurong said louder, for the future of all. With that, the official presentation concluded. The ministers left the hall in silence, processing everything they had just heard. But soon enough, the murmurs started. What do you think? One asked, breaking the silence. Young Hong, clearly dissatisfied, replied, What do I think? My mind is completely blocked. We need to submit a petition immediately to stop him. The Crown Prince uses grand phrases like, for the future of everyone, to hide his true intentions. He disregards our traditions and values, and worse, he leans toward legalism rather than Confucianism. This deeply saddens me. As others chimed in, the sentiment of dissatisfaction spread. Exactly. How could the Crown Prince come up with such reckless ideas? Another added. Even some imperial court officials shared similar concerns. We need to submit a petition immediately. This is dangerous, one official urged. Sung, one of the first to openly oppose Hurong's ideas, took it a step further. On the surface, the Crown Prince's words sound reasonable, but he's trying to revive the tyranny of Qin Shi Huang. We must stop him. The conversation took a darker turn as Sungam continued. If the worst-case scenario occurs, we might have no choice but to depose the Crown Prince. The room fell into an uneasy silence, many stunned by the severity of his words. Isn't that a bit too extreme? One questioned. But Sung remained resolute. After hearing the Crown Prince's presentation, do you still think this isn't serious? Even His Majesty didn't start with these kinds of ideas. Before he could continue, someone quickly covered his mouth. Watch your words. Do you think your neck is made of iron? Sung angrily pushed the hand away. Am I wrong? How could a 9-year-old child spout such nonsense? We need to hold those who educated him accountable, and even His Majesty, the man interjected. Then say that we need to tighten the discipline of the Crown Prince, but talk of dethroning him is too much. But Sungam shot back. Look at the situation. Do you think it's not too late already? We need to depose him now, or the kingdom will follow a dangerous path. Meanwhile, in a different group, some ministers who supported the Crown Prince's views expressed their relief. It's been so long since we've heard practical suggestions for the kingdom. I never imagined the Crown Prince would be this outstanding. As both factions crossed paths in the hallway, the air grew tense. Those against Hurong saw the supporters as nothing more than hypocrites. Meanwhile, the supporters saw their opposition as authoritarian relics. By late afternoon, Hurong had a private meeting with his father, Chung Neo. Your presentation today was excellent, his father praised. Thank you, father, Hurong replied, joy evident in his voice. I've said this before, Chung Neo continued, but you brought up many things I hadn't even considered. There are so many policies I want to implement right away. But Hurong, ever pragmatic, responded, Father, you flatter me. But those policies will be difficult to implement immediately. Chung Neo chuckled. I know, but I still think we should discuss policy matters more often. They both sighed at the thought of the petitions likely to flood the court the following morning. The Supreme Council will have a rough day tomorrow, Chung Neo noted. The next morning, the Supreme Council's chambers were packed with petitions. Two men stood outside, staring at the piles of scrolls. Did they stay up all night? One muttered. It sure looks like it. We need to start sorting these. Inside, Chung Neon looked utterly exhausted as he eyed the towering stack of petitions. So many. he muttered as he pulled out a random petition to read. As he scanned its contents, his face darkened, and he clenched his fist in anger. Fuang Tian, he called. Yes, your highness? Summon the crown prince. Hurong arrived quickly and bowed before the emperor. Father, you called for me? Yes, the emperor replied, his voice grim. It seems some officials didn't understand your presentation yesterday. With a sharp voice, the emperor commanded, Lan Jiai-chun, read your petition aloud for the crown prince to hear. The tension in the room was palpable as Lan Jiai-chun hesitated, but he had no choice. He began reading, pointing out the flaws in the crown prince's views, from his challenge to Neo-Confucianism to his proposal for the inclusion of concubine-born children in official roles. When Lan Jiai-chun finished, Hurong asked, Father, may I respond? The emperor granted permission, and Hurong began, First, Neo-Confucianism is merely a tool we use to achieve the royal way. If we solely focus on it, we limit ourselves. Hurong continued, addressing each point systematically, dismantling the arguments with sharp logic. Are concubine-born children the only ones who have ever abused power? Isn't it unjust to lay all the blame on them? He finished with a powerful statement. For the common people with no power, who is more fearsome than a tiger? Is it the government officials or the local scholars? Lan Jiai-chun's face paled as he remained silent. The emperor asked, Lan Jiai-chun, respond. But the man was unable to speak, trembling under the weight of the crown prince's challenge. The emperor then handed a yellow scroll to Hurong. Read this. As Hurong scanned the contents, his brows furrowed, and his eyes widened. This petition suggests that we punish those who encourage luxury. It claims that wealth will be worshipped over morality. Hurong didn't hold back. I believe the person who wrote this petition should be severely punished. The officials were once again shocked. The crown prince was demanding punishment himself? Hurong continued his rebuttal, defending his position and lambasting the false claims in the petition. This isn't honest counsel. It's a deliberate attempt to deceive. The room fell silent once again as Hurong finished his defense. The emperor, now satisfied, concluded, As for the punishment, I will decide it carefully. After the session ended, the tension spilled into private confrontations, with the Grand Inspector berating an official. Who do you think you are? Suggesting we depose the crown prince. The palace was rife with whispers, plots, and fears of what the future might hold under the young but formidable Hurong. Upon hearing the grand official's words, the other officials froze, stunned. He gripped the man by the collar, practically shaking with fury. Who are you to mention deposing the crown prince? He barked. The man struggled to respond, choking out each word. How could a crown prince who ignores Confucianism and dares to tread the path of treason be worthy of his title? The grand official fired back. You're proposing deposing a child? 9 years old. Are you even listening to yourself? The man hesitated, stammering. What does age have to do with adhering to the teachings of the sages? At this, the grand official's patience snapped. You fool, he thundered. Do you think changing a ruler's direction requires anything less than timing, geographical advantage, and popular support? These were the factors that made His Highness the Crown Prince. And we have none of those now. Your reckless plans are risking the lives of everyone here. The man faltered, but his voice returned. A civil servant must speak truth to power, even at risk to himself, he retorted. The other officials gaped, unmoving, watching this clash unfold. The grand official let go of his collar in frustration, muttering, Even an idiot like you managed to make it to office. We're doomed. Meanwhile, Jean Ho, in his quarters, sighed deeply. I knew this would blow up. But this bad? Why does the chief minister always oppose me? They're all so stuck. Constantly digging up old arguments, he thought, pacing back and forth. Then he stopped. Wait. From their perspective, it actually makes sense. If someone asked me to drop agriculture in favor of commerce, I'd react the same way. Calming himself, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Outside, the servants knew the crown prince was furious. Do they think I don't know how to write a memorial myself? Fuming, Jean Ho seized a pen and began writing, carefully crafting each word. Fine, I'll show them real humility. Much later, an official spotted the eunuch, arms stacked with documents. Wait, Aren't you from the Eastern Palace? What are you doing with all that? He asked suspiciously. The eunuch explained that everything in his arms was written by the crown prince himself. All of it? The official stammered. He looked at the stack of memorials, his face turning to one of resigned pity. So we're not going home today. In court, the emperor couldn't stop chuckling. Who would have thought the boy would write a memorial right away? Truly my son. But there's no stopping him now. Then he turned to the chief minister, saying, Lan Jiai-chin, why don't you read it too? Grudgingly, Lan Jiai-chin accepted it. Yes, your majesty, he replied, forcing himself to open it. His annoyed expression piqued the curiosity of the Grand Censor and Grand Inspector. The emperor then ordered the head of the Board of Revenue to pass it to the Minister of Revenue to read aloud. The minister, visibly caught off guard, took a deep breath and began. I am Crown Prince Young and a loyal servant to your majesty. I humbly submit this memorial. Several ministers have accused me of following legalism, using the downfall of the Qin dynasty as an example. However, Qin did not collapse due to legalism. It fell because Qin Shi Huang and his officials lost the people's support, plundering and killing the innocent. But it was legalism that made Qin the most powerful state during the Warring States period. To this day, legalist principles form the foundation of law. So why is it wrong to draw on multiple schools of thought? There is a saying, a great tree stands tall against the wind because its roots are strong and deep. For our young nation to become a great tree, we must accept various ideologies to deepen our roots. Is Confucianism alone the way to follow the will of the sages? When he finished, the room was silent, except for the chief minister's quiet sneer. The emperor's eyes gleamed with pride. Isn't my son brilliant? He said with a grin. This memorial has a lot we need to consider. Ministers, I want your thoughts. Study it carefully and report back. The entire court responded in unison. By your majesty's command. A few days later, Jin Ho was walking with the eunuch, deep in thought. Now that I've said everything, I feel much better. Not far off, frantic shouts rang out. Minister, wake up! The minister was collapsed on the ground, muttering, I surrender. Despairing, the eunuch pointed at a mountain of papers. You don't have time to lie here. Look at all these memorials. The minister groaned. Just kill me now. Jin Ho passed by, watching the scene unfold. The problem is they keep firing back with more memorials. As I thought, if I want support, I need the people to see the benefits of smallpox inoculation firsthand. That's the only way they'll accept new policies. Just a little more time. He turned away, leaving the minister to his fate. Days later, in court, someone reported that in areas with inoculation, few people had caught smallpox. Suggestions to extend the inoculation to other regions immediately followed. Good, the emperor responded. Let's expand it. But another official raised an objection. But there have only been a few cases, Your Majesty. The chief minister added, Your Majesty, it's too early to expand based on just a few cases. And isn't inoculation just cowpox pus? It's best to observe longer. The emperor reluctantly agreed. Days later, the emperor addressed the court again. Most of Jiangyi province has been inoculated, though there have been some side effects. Neighboring districts have submitted memorials requesting inoculation. I also wish to expand it. The chief minister once more jumped in. Your Majesty, we shouldn't proceed. The current financial situation makes this expansion impractical. I urge reconsideration. Another minister reported, rumor has it that wealthy families in some areas have donated cattle for inoculation, and more memorials are requesting permission. The emperor nodded. Then let's not delay any longer. Ministers, prepare to expand the inoculation. Again, the chief minister objected. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but this isn't possible for many reasons. The emperor, visibly displeased, demanded, explain yourself. The chief minister said, winter is coming, making it difficult to manage funds. Irritated, the emperor retorted, we can collect funds from wealthy families for cattle. The chief minister insisted, but scholars and officials will strongly oppose that, and the effectiveness of inoculation is still unproven. Plus, The ones performing the procedure are mere cattle herders. The emperor's hand trembled with rage. Lan Jiai-chin, you despicable coward, he growled. He pointed directly at him and shouted, "Shut your mouth." Silence fell over the court. The emperor held up a scroll. Do you know what this is? It's a report on Hanyang's inoculation. You keep saying it's vile and ineffective, yet every minister here has been inoculated. The officials dropped to their knees. Your Majesty, we deserve to die. The emperor waved them off. I don't want to see you. Get out. The emperor rose, visibly furious. Fine. I'll handle it myself. Watching him leave, the officials shouted after him, Your Majesty! But young Hung, who had faced the emperor's wrath, still seethed. One minister, exasperated, hissed, Lan Jiai-chin, don't you know when to stay quiet? But Lan Jiai-chin stayed silent, only fueling their panic. What now? Another asked. One sighed, the repentance ritual and then find a way to expand the inoculation. It's our only option. As they walked away, grumbling, Lan Jiai-chin stayed behind, lost in thought. I've lived too long. If things continue like this, we'll return to the tyrannical days of King Taejong. I can't let it happen. Meanwhile, Jin Ho, hearing the eunuch's account, asked calmly, And where did father go? To see the queen, the eunuch replied. Jin Ho's expression darkened. Shall we play a little trick while we're at it? The eunuch, confused, mumbled, What? Your Highness? Jin Ho replied, Never mind. Psychological warfare won't help now. Meanwhile, the ministers had started the repentance ritual. Laying out a mat, the Minister of Revenue grumbled, My knees are already sore, and now we're doing this? Suddenly, a frantic voice called out, Minister of Revenue! Startled, he turned. What's wrong? Panting, the man said, The Chief Minister, he's writing a memorial accusing His Majesty. The Minister of Revenue felt as if lightning struck him. What? Is he out of his mind? He hurried to the Chief Minister's quarters, shouting, We have to stop him. Inside, young Hung turned. Chief Minister! The Minister of Revenue burst in. Are you really writing another memorial? Have you lost it? Ignoring the Chief Minister, he brushed past the crowd, paying no mind to the heated whispers. What are you doing? Why didn't you stop him? Do you want blood spilled? One demanded, frustration sharp in his voice. Another responded calmly, I didn't stop him because I understand his reasoning. A true scholar of integrity must stand firm. True to his word, young Hung took the memorial and presented it to the emperor. Its contents read as follows. I, Chief Minister Ryo Young-yoon, humbly submit this memorial to your Majesty. The court, true to its name, is the heart of governance, where the decisions shaping a nation take form. Thus, policies must be considered carefully before implementation, and consistency from beginning to end is vital. If we cannot maintain consistency, how can the people trust the nation? Regarding the smallpox inoculation, your Majesty's decision has wavered. Initially, we agreed to a trial in Hanyang to observe its effectiveness before any nationwide expansion. You consented, yet after a few voices suggested broader application, your Majesty altered course. How can that be called consistent? Policies should be implemented only when the monarch and the ministers are in agreement. Why? Because a monarch cannot possibly consider every matter in detail. Your Majesty must consult with the ministers and heed their recommendations. To act unilaterally in politics echoes the behavior of a tyrant, not a king. If tradition allows tyranny, what fate awaits the Joseon dynasty? To prevent this, consensus between the monarch and ministers is essential, no matter the cost. For the future of the Joseon dynasty, I implore your Majesty to reconsider the decision to expand smallpox inoculation nationwide, for I believe it to be ineffective. However, should it prove otherwise, I, Ryo Young-yoon, am prepared to offer all my assets. The entire court fell silent when the emperor finished reading the memorial. Not a soul dared to speak until he broke the silence. Have you all read this? They responded cautiously, Yes, your Majesty. Faces dripped with sweat, and none dared to raise their heads as tension filled the hall. After a moment, the emperor's tone turned icy. When have I ever ruled autocratically? He demanded, his gaze hard and unyielding. The ministers sat frozen. I ask again, when have I ever ruled autocratically? The hall turned colder than the morning air outside as the emperor's fury mounted. A king who only waits for his ministers' consensus is no king at all. His anger peaked, his fist slamming the table with a resounding thud. Do you all really believe I'm ruling with a tyrant's hand? For what purpose? The ministers sweated, hands clenched, struggling to withstand the emperor's wrath. His voice shook the hall as he continued. If a smallpox outbreak spreads where we withheld inoculation, how will you answer? Will you wait as lives are lost just to verify its results? Lan Ji-chin interjected, Your Majesty, we share the pain of these losses, but securing the nation's governance is paramount. Besides, smallpox is not new. King Chung and Ion's face flushed red with anger. You, he growled, teeth clenched, dare say the lives sacrificed are within an acceptable range to uphold court traditions? Suddenly, a messenger entered, kneeling low. Your Majesty, urgent news. Smallpox has broken out in Zhangqian's Ayondang district. The announcement left King Chung and Ion stunned, disbelief widening his eyes. Lan Ji-chin, too, froze, unease shadowing his face. The emperor quickly ordered, quarantine the Ayondang district. Limit contact with other regions except Hanyang. Yes, Your Majesty, the messenger replied, bowing out. Turning to the Minister of Revenue, the king asked, What measures are in place for treatment? Physicians have been dispatched to every corner of Ayondang. Good. Ensure patients are treated swiftly. Then the crown prince himself burst in, breathless. Father, may I speak? The king allowed him in, noting the urgency in his son's eyes. I heard about the smallpox outbreak in Jiangqian and the physicians we're sending there, the prince panted. Why not call for additional help from Hanyang? Before the king could respond, Lan Ji-chin objected. That would be too reckless. The prince stood firm. The physicians will be busy treating the sick. They'll need assistance. If we rely on people from Jiangqian, the disease could spread further. It makes sense to bring people from Hanyang, and we can pay them well. Lan Ji-chin remained unmoved. Crown Prince, if those from Hanyang fall ill, who will protect our people? Without hesitation, the prince replied, I fully trust in the inoculation's effectiveness. If it fails, I'll relinquish my title. He met his father's eyes, hand on his heart. And if the people of Hanyang hesitate, I'll go myself. The hall held its breath. The emperor turned to the Minister of Revenue. Issue the decree for volunteers from Hanyang. The ministers bowed. By your command, Your Majesty. Turning back to the crown prince, the emperor warned. You mustn't make reckless promises like this again. The prince bowed. Yes, father. Inwardly, he felt victorious. He'd seized the opportunity. Days later, as the emperor arrived at the palace, Haiyang met him with excitement. Father, you're here. The emperor replied, Yes, Haiyang. Have you heard from Jiangchul? Haiyang hadn't but eagerly listened as his father shared the news. Since the initial cases, there have been no new infections. Overjoyed, Haiyang's eyes sparkled. Just as I hoped. The emperor smiled, pride evident. You've proven your commitment, even to a method others dismissed. I'm proud of you. Basking in his father's praise, Haiyang thought, I've won, Lan Ji-chin. Slowly, I'll outmaneuver you. But the emperor's voice cut through his thoughts. Haiyang, I'm planning to execute Lan Ji-chin. Haiyang was stunned, his mind reeling. And I'm considering dealing with those who sided with him, the emperor continued. For the future of Yoxian, I feel it must be done. Am I going too far? Haiyang paused, weighing his words. Father, they must be punished to set an example. This could strengthen the crown's authority. The emperor listened intently. But, Haiyang added, I'm not sure execution is necessary. Lan Ji-chin has served the nation well. Perhaps exile is a more fitting punishment. The emperor nodded slowly, seemingly in agreement. After a pause, he replied, I will consider it. And so, on the day the emperor declared Lan Ji-chin's exile, The balance of power shifted once more. The minister threw himself to the floor, pleading, "Your Majesty, please reconsider. I only wanted to ensure the inoculation would truly work." But the emperor, fury blazing in his eyes, cut him off. "Even now, you're still trying to wriggle out of this? Silence." One by one, other ministers bowed low, begging on behalf of Lan Jiaichin. "Your Majesty, perhaps Chief Minister Lan made mistakes, but everything he did was in loyalty to the nation. Please reconsider." Their pleas only fanned King Chung and Ion's anger. "Keep this up, and I'll start to wonder if you're all in cahoots with that hypocrite. Don't test me." One minister, undeterred, stood his ground. "Your Majesty, condemning an innocent man is unjust. Matters of state require consensus between king and ministers, as the sages taught. Agreement is the cornerstone of monarchy." The emperor's face turned crimson as he exploded, pointing furiously at the ministers kneeling before him. "You hypocrites! Are you opposing me because you're following the sages? Or is it to feed your own greed? You don't want balance. You want me to be a puppet." At that moment, Lan Jiaichin, feeling the pressure, dared to raise his head. "Your Majesty, I never intended dash." But before he could finish, a figure in purple robes stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Jin Mu of the Royal Guard awaits your command." Without missing a beat, the emperor ordered, "Jin Mu, take these hypocrites and throw them in the dungeon." Lan Jiaichin, along with the Grand Inspector and Grand Censor, must be imprisoned. As the guards dragged them away, they shouted desperately, "Your Majesty, this defies the sages. This is what the inoculation has brought." Meanwhile, those who had previously called for the crown prince's deposition faced dire consequences. One found guilty of treason, shackled and exiled 1,000 miles for misleading the monarch. Lan Jiaichin's family, along with those of the Grand Inspector and Grand Censor, were demoted to commoners with 80% of their assets seized. Haiyang couldn't help but smile. But they're still alive, aren't they? With the opposition exiled, time rolled on, bringing spring. Sitting on his throne, King Chung and Ion surveyed the court. "Everyone's here today. I have an important announcement." Whispers fluttered through the room. How had the crown prince managed all this? Could jump rope really change a person? "For the Joseon dynasty's future, I intend to launch a significant reform." The emperor set down a reform proposal booklet, his excitement plain as day. Ministers gasped, everyone but Haiyang, who wore a tired expression. "So it begins," he thought. Weeks earlier, while Haiyang was sound asleep, he'd heard his father's voice at his door. "Haiyang, are you awake?" Rubbing his eyes, Haiyang sat up. "No, father. Come in." "No need. I just want that chart from your presentation." Haiyang gestured sleepily to his desk. "Take it, father." "Thank you." His father called for a servant who took the chart. "Go back to sleep, son." Half asleep, Haiyang muttered, "Yes, father," unaware this midnight request would haunt him. Days later, his father showed up again. "Haiyang, I need an explanation about your chart." Haiyang, barely awake, nodded. "Yes, father. Come in." The next day, over lunch, his father brought it up again, leaving Haiyang confused. By the third visit, Haiyang realized something wasn't right. Doesn't he ever get tired? He thought. It was 1 a.m., and his father's eyes gleamed with energy, eagerly dissecting the chart. The king turned to Haiyang. "You still don't get it. Let me explain again." Exhausted, Haiyang quickly replied, "No, father. I get it perfectly." The emperor beamed. "Thank goodness I have such a smart son." Internally, Haiyang cried, forcing a smile as he nodded. Back in the present, King Chung and Ion shared his reform plans with enthusiasm. Review this plan thoroughly, address any issues, and suggest improvements. The ministers bowed in unison. "By your command, your majesty." The king's excitement grew as he continued. "If any of you have better ideas, bring them to me." Thus began King Seong Chung and Ion's reform. The first target, the central government structure. He outlined a new system based on 6 departments and proposed steps to implement it. The second focus was local government, Provinces like Guangdao were divided into districts, each to establish its own local government. And then, the real challenge, commerce and industry. While out walking, the king turned to Haiyang. Today we'll discuss commerce and industry. Haiyang blinked. Right now, father? Yes. During my morning exercise, I realized that by growing commerce and industry, we won't just strengthen the economy, but also increase the monarchy's power. Haiyang thought for a moment. It's simple, father. Isn't agriculture what makes the nobles wealthy? If we encourage commerce and industry, we can generate more profit than they could from land, which would strengthen the crown. The king raised an eyebrow. But the nobles are the biggest buyers. Won't they grow even more powerful? Haiyang replied, Look at the bigger picture, father. The king's eyes lit up. You mean foreign trade? Haiyang smirked. Exactly. Exporting goods lets us grow without domestic limitations, while nobles tied to land won't hold the same power. The king placed a hand on Haiyang's shoulder. You truly are my son. Realizing his father had more questions, Haiyang tried to finish quickly. But the king, curiosity piqued, asked, Won't nobles still hold the capital, making them powerful lenders? Instead of the nobles lending, let the state act as the bank. A national bank lending capital at fair interest. The king nodded, embracing the idea, and proposed it as a final reform step. This great reform led to an explosion in government roles, requiring a constant search for talented people. Sejong even reformed education, ensuring commoners could access basic schooling. But with new policies came fresh problems. Kingdom-wide adjustments took years to settle, and it wasn't until 15 years later that the reform was fully in place. Historians would call it the reform of the Year of the Dragon. When the reforms completed, the king turned to Haiyang. Thanks to you, our people's lives will improve. Haiyang grinned, giving a thumbs up. No need for thanks, father. I'm just glad to help. The king laughed heartily. You rascal! Haiyang chuckled. Father, why don't you let me handle some of this? You don't need to do everything. The king ruffled Haiyang's hair. This is a monarch's duty, son. I must understand it myself. Pouting, Haiyang sighed. I didn't mean it like that. I can work with the ministers and report to you. The king asked thoughtfully, which is more effective, learning by doing or just hearing it from someone else? Haiyang was taken aback, but the king continued, I refuse to be a passive ruler. He laughed, heading inside, leaving Haiyang in awe. Some things can't be predicted, he realized. Later, the familiar call echoed. His Majesty has arrived. The king entered, and Haiyang greeted him respectfully. Father, you're here. The king smiled. I was reviewing your chart, and something's been bothering me. Hearing chart, Haiyang tensed up, but the king continued. Not about the reforms this time. Haiyang sighed, still wary. What is it, father? The king pressed. In your presentation, you mentioned several policies but skipped the military. Why? Haiyang froze, then smirked. The king noticed and muttered, Crafty kid. Haiyang replied, If I bring up the military, it'll stir things up even more. Then he countered, What do you think of our current military, father? The king answered thoughtfully, We're not yet stable. We need a stronger system to protect Yushin. Haiyang nodded. Exactly, and I think we need to build up our naval forces. The navy? The king questioned. Yes, father. Our ships are too small and our forces undertrained. Even reaching Tsushima Island is risky. The king agreed. We must strengthen the navy. But the budget? Haiyang, confident, offered. I have a solution. Mining stone. Stone? The king asked, puzzled. Soon, decrees flooded the land, calling skilled miners to the ministry. People speculated, wondering if this was a push for gold. Inside the court, the king calculated. A stable currency supply of gold, silver, and copper is essential. Haiyang, deep in thought, spoke up. Father, we'll also need iron, sulfur, limestone, and coal. The king, intrigued by this unfamiliar term, asked, What is coal? Haiyang launched into a detailed explanation. Coal is what's left after trees break down and compress over time into a rock-like material. It burns hotter and more efficiently than wood, which means we can avoid tearing down more forests. The king's curiosity only grew. Really? That's impressive. And what's your plan for limestone? Limestone is crucial for construction and iron smelting. Construction. The king raised an eyebrow. How does limestone fit into that? Haiyang hesitated slightly, replying, "Forgive me, father. I need to research that a bit more. But it's widely available, so gathering it should be easy." Inwardly, Haiyang thought back to modern times, recalling that iron, coal, and cement were the backbones of industrial development. Without these resources, how can any industry grow? One minister chimed in, "Crown Prince, forgive me, but Rosian doesn't have sulfur mines. That's why we always import it from Hua." Haiyang responded confidently, "But are we sure we don't have any sulfur deposits? It's hard to believe we're the only ones missing it. Maybe the mines are in remote places, but sulfur is crucial for making gunpowder. If we rely solely on imports, we could face serious problems down the line." The ministers were visibly shaken. It was only now they understood the stakes. The king nodded firmly. "Then we must conduct a full investigation." Another minister agreed. "Yes. Let's have the miners focus on locating sulfur during their digs." Feeling accomplished, Haiyang thought, nothing like invoking national defense to speed things along. Soon, skilled miners from all 8 provinces of the Ozan dynasty gathered in Hanyang, and the king even established a new division under the Ministry of Works, called the Ministry of Resources, to manage the miners. The minister in charge addressed them. "Your mission is to travel across Ozan and search for the minerals on this list. Do well, and you will be handsomely rewarded." The miners shouted in unison, "We will do our best." At that moment, the king himself arrived. "His Majesty has arrived." The miners immediately bowed low. The king gave them a warm smile. "The work you're about to undertake is vital. The prosperity and strength of our kingdom depend on your success, so I urge you all to give it your best." The miners chorused, "Yes, Your Majesty, we'll give it our all." The minister handed out lists of minerals to the miners, who examined them closely. One miner, reading aloud, stumbled, "Coal? What's that?" Another miner, who had heard rumors, chimed in, "It's this black rock that catches fire. Burns like wood, but hotter." The first miner looked skeptical. "A rock that burns? Strange." Moving down the list, they came to sulfur. "Do we even have sulfur in Rosian?" They also noticed an additional note. "Report immediately if you find a shiny black rock that resembles obsidian but is more brittle. It's called graphite." Before long, a large shipment of minerals was brought to Haiyang, who beamed with satisfaction. "They've done well. We now have everything we need." Just then, a messenger approached. "Your Highness, we have news. The envoy from the Ming dynasty has returned." Overjoyed, Haiyang exclaimed, "Finally!" Inside the court, a table laden with books and maps was set in the center. A minister examined them, astonished, while the king picked up a large piece of paper, frowning. "What is this map about?" "Father, I requested these," Haiyang explained quickly. "They're records and maps from Zhang He's expeditions, essential for governing our nation." The Minister of Revenue added, "I've heard of Zhang He, a eunuch who led vast sea expeditions under the Ming Emperor Yongle. Some say he even reached as far as Southeast Asia and Africa." The king, recalling Zhang He, looked puzzled. "But why would we need his records for governing?" Haiyang held up the map with a glint of excitement. "Father, this map is priceless." His father and the minister exchanged puzzled looks, clearly not understanding. Frustrated, Haiyang continued, "Do you remember the trouble we had importing buffalo horns?" The Minister of Revenue looked as though he were trying to remember. "Buffalo horns? Buffalo horns are needed for making bows, but we lack them here, so we rely on imports from the Ming dynasty. The problem is we only get them through tribute missions. Isn't that a hassle? And the Ming dynasty isn't the only place with buffaloes. Dai Viet and Siam also have plenty, but we don't trade with them because we don't know how to reach them." A collective ah went through the ministers as the realization set in. Encouraged, Haiyang continued, "But with this map, we can find those nations and trade with them. avoiding unnecessary costs. The king stroked his chin thoughtfully. Impressive. He gave a thumbs up, a gesture he had recently learned from Hyang. The ministers looked on, puzzled. Your Majesty, what does that mean? One asked. The king laughed. It means, you're the best something the crown prince taught me. Standing beside the minister, Hyang gave a cool smile but was inwardly rolling his eyes. Suddenly, the king turned serious. Crown Prince, I have one question. Why would the Ming dynasty hand over something so valuable? What trick did you pull? Hyang, a little nervous, thought back. We'll have to go back a bit. He recounted how, during a visit to Emperor Yongle, the envoys had presented a bird cage as tribute, impressing the emperor, who was taken with the falcon's beauty. He asked the envoys what they desired in return, and one boldly requested sulfur and copper, followed by a hesitant request for Zhang He's voyage records. The emperor had paused. Zhang He's exploration records? Why would Joseon need that? With flattering words, the envoys had replied, Joseon is small, isolated. Your Majesty's grace has shown us that the world is vast, filled with other nations. We humbly request the record to witness the Ming dynasty's greatness. The envoy's flattery had pushed the emperor to smile, finally agreeing to grant the records. Hyang concluded, and that's how it happened, father. The king looked bemused. Well, they worked hard for it, but why would the Ming give up something so valuable? Could there be an ulterior motive? The Grand Censor, looking uneasy, interjected. Your Majesty, something seems off about this record. The king raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Holding up the document, the Grand Censor replied, This isn't a copy. It's the original. The court fell silent, ministers stunned. The original record? The Grand Censor opened the record, revealing a hidden letter. Trembling, he handed it to the king. The king read it aloud. This document has been delivered through official channels. Joseon need not inquire further about its origins. Hyang stifled a laugh, imagining the Ming emperor tossing the letter over with a muttered, Just take it, don't ask. With a sly grin, Hyang looked at the king. Father, it seems the Ming dynasty just wanted to get rid of it. The king, still unsure, asked, What do you mean? Hyang remembered his history lessons, explaining, Emperor Yongle gained power through a coup and needed accomplishments to solidify his rule. These expeditions boosted his image but were incredibly costly due to the tribute system. After his death, future emperors erased these records to avoid repeating such costly ventures. The Minister of Public Works, concerned, asked, If it's so costly, shouldn't we avoid it too? Hyang quickly replied, It's different for us. The Ming relied on a tribute system which we don't need to replicate. Instead, we can pursue bilateral trade. The ministers looked at each other, confused. Bilateral trade? Once again, Hyang introduced a fresh idea. He grinned. It's the opposite of the Ming's tribute and gift model. We'll swap goods both countries genuinely need. The king's curiosity piqued. Tell me more. Hyang nodded. In short, we run it on straightforward trade. The court will handle transport, securing routes, and collect taxes to keep trade profitable. This way, we can import essentials at lower costs and stabilize prices since we'd control the supply. King Sejong pondered this, while the Minister of Taxation looked skeptical. Essentials? Foreign countries even have such goods? Ozen already produces top-quality items. Without missing a beat, Hyang asked, Do you all know about pepper? The Minister of Public Works snapped his fingers. Pepper, right? I nearly forgot about that. Hyang suppressed a sigh. These people have no idea how bland life is without it. He continued, We barely get pepper from Arab merchants, which is why it costs a fortune. A minister raised an eyebrow. But isn't that risky? If we import too much, people might overspend, and our wealth will leak out. The Minister of Public Works shrugged. Sure, but if we block it, smuggling spikes, prices soar, and bribery spreads like wildfire. Another minister agreed. True, the more prosperous Roshan gets, the better life becomes. Right? Everyone nodded. Agreed. Hyang spoke up. Minister of Taxation, where are the other items I requested? In storage, the minister replied. Hyung turned to his father. May I bring them to the East Palace? King Sejong granted permission. The Minister of Taxation added, There are still 20 chests left, Your Highness. Really? Hyung opened one and exclaimed, There's more than I thought. Curious, the minister asked, What is it? Sugar, Hyung replied with a smirk. Sugar? Cane sugar? The minister asked, wide-eyed. Hyung recalled his teacher, Samchin Pa, mentioning how valuable sugar was back in the day a true luxury. The ministers gawked. Sugar? That pricey. King Sejong looked mildly shocked. Even as the crown prince, you're living lavishly, aren't you? Hyung chuckled to himself and turned to the Minister of Taxation. Do we have the price listed? How much? The minister checked, his eyes widening. Sugar? It's 20 taels of silver. Everyone gasped. King Sejong's jaw dropped. Is that right, Minister? The minister stammered. In total, 201 worth of silver, Your Majesty. Once again, the court was stunned. That kind of money couldn't buy a pinch of sugar at the market. How is this possible? Samchin Po's words echoed in Hyung's mind about how isolated Joseon was, completely unaware that the Ming had turned sugar into a mass-produced commodity. So, that's how I got it at dirt-cheap prices, he said. King Sejong beamed. I'm proud of you, knowledgeable and thrifty, just as a crown prince should be. The Minister of Public Works, however, wasn't so sure. But we have honey and grain syrup, why bother with foreign products? Another minister chimed in. Honey is scarce, and grain syrup depends on the harvest. Why make it harder than it has to be? Sparks flew between them as they locked eyes. It's not about convenience, one minister shot back. If we keep importing, we'll become dependent. Better than letting smuggling take over, retorted the other. Hyung interrupted. Has anyone here actually tasted cane sugar? Confused looks. One said they tried it once. Another only tasted it after passing the state exam. Some hadn't tasted it at all. Hyung sighed. Our Joseon is poor, isn't it? King Sejong overheard. What did you just say? Oh, nothing, father. Hyung changed the subject. Since we now have plenty of sugar, why don't we share it with court officials and reward palace servants? Reward with sugar? Murmured the ministers. Hyung nodded. Those who've devoted themselves to the nation should be recognized. Soon, palace servants and officials received sugar as a reward, and the ministers agreed to sell the stockpile. Days later, the king indulged in his newfound sugar stash, much to Hyung's amusement. Father, you're eating sugar again, Hyung exclaimed. Look, your belly's growing. The king, unbothered, replied. I was planning to skip dinner, but what if you get diabetes? Hyung pressed. The king waved it off. I know. Their playful argument was cut short by a call from outside. Your Highness, the ministers are here. Clearing his throat, the king called out. Let them in. The doors opened, and 3 ministers entered, each exuding a commanding presence. Hyung looked on, intrigued. Who are these guys? The king began. As you know, the left minister has retired. I've decided on new appointments. Turning to Hyung, he continued. This is likely your first time meeting them. Let's have introductions. The first stepped forward. Mensa Yoon, right minister. Next, Hong Hai, new left minister. Finally, Remix, prime minister. Hyung's mind raced. Could it really be them? His excitement grew. If they're here, that means. Meanwhile, the king addressed the ministers, turning to the Minister of Public Works to discuss water measurement. Your Highness believes we need more precise tools. Jong Ian-shin, take charge. The king ordered. Lost in thought, Hyung could hardly contain himself. Is this Jong Ian-shin's grand entrance? The Avengers? Later, in the Eastern Palace, Hyung was busy writing. Finishing up, he clenched his notes with pride and hurried to the door. Let's go to the royal infirmary, he said eagerly. The servant bowed. Yes, Your Highness. Arriving at the infirmary, Hyung's excitement waned. So, Jong Ian-shin isn't here? A guard replied. He's at the water clock, Your Highness. Hyung's face fell. Oh no. Seeing his disappointment, the guard offered to summon Zhang Shin, but Haiyang shook his head. No need. Busy people shouldn't be summoned for no reason. He's at the water clock, you said. Yes, your highness. Without delay, Haiyang headed for the water clock. When he saw the huge contraption, he marveled. Wow, it's even bigger than I imagined. Nearby, a man muttered, deep in thought. No, that won't work. Haiyang approached him. Hey, are you Zhang Shin? The man bowed. Your humble servant greets the crown prince. Humble servant? Haiyang smirked. People might curse you if a fifth-rank official still calls himself that. I wouldn't dare, Zhang replied. Haiyang waved it off. Forget it. I saw you frowning at the water clock. What's the issue? It's the measurements, your highness. Calculating them all is proving challenging. Haiyang's eyes sparkled. What if we made it smaller? Zhang hesitated but said, I thought about it, but that's impossible. Haiyang handed him a design he'd sketched. Here, take a look. Zhang's jaw dropped as he opened it. A pendulum-powered clock? When he finished, Haiyang grinned. So, what do you think? Did you draw this yourself? Honestly, 30% is from the West. Actually, it's 100% from the 21st century. Can you make it? Zhang replied. I'm not sure, but I'll try. Haiyang beamed. Great, let's start right away. Zhang turned to leave but stopped. I'm afraid I can't start immediately. I have another task. Haiyang's mood soured. I'll take care of it. Zhang blinked. Excuse me? I'll handle it. Just start on the clock. Hesitant, Zhang said. Is that really okay? I could lose my head. Don't worry, Haiyang assured him. Know anyone skilled with calculations? Zhang listed a few names, and Haiyang clapped. Got it. Leave everything else to me and start working on this. After visiting Zhang, Haiyang went to see his father. The king raised an eyebrow. What brings you here? Haiyang, undeterred, said, Father, I need to enlist a few people. A few? The king echoed. The king raised an eyebrow. You want to enlist people? Haiyang nodded. Yes, I need a few key people. Lord Deng Cho from the Ministry of Public Works, Lord Deng Easy from the Hall of Sages, and Lord White Trio from the Ministry of Justice. The ministers exchanged shocked glances. But Haiyang wasn't done yet. I'll also need some skilled craftsmen from the military, and Lord Zhang Shin from the Royal Infirmary. The Minister of Public Works quickly interrupted. Your Highness, those are, well, they're very important people. The king turned to him. Why so surprised? Is there an issue with them? The minister hesitated. No, Your Highness. Forgive me, but these individuals are essential in their departments. Without them, it'll be tough to manage state affairs. I understand the Crown Prince's goals are important, but national priorities come first. The king looked back at Haiyang. Why do you need these people? Explain. After a moment of thought, Haiyang replied, I want to invent things that'll make Ozen stronger. The king's curiosity deepened. Go on. Haiyang clarified. I have several inventions in mind to strengthen Ozen. Right now, I have about 10 designs in my study at the East Palace, but they're just the basics. I need precise calculations to make them work. That's why I need experts in mathematics. He added, if they help me, they'll become pioneers who'll contribute to Ozen's wealth and military power, making us strong like a tiger with wings. Seeing Haiyang's confidence, the king looked slightly puzzled. Really? A nearby minister looked equally bewildered, unsure of the crown prince's full intentions. The next day at the Eastern Palace, 3 officials gathered, deep in discussion. The first to speak was Lord Deng Yizi. Been a while, Lord Jiang. Lord Jiang nodded. Yes, Lord Deng Yizi. Long time no see. Lord Deng Yunji turned to him. I hear the crown prince has you working on a clock. Is that true? Lord Jiang held up the design. Yes, this is the clock he sketched. As they studied the drawing, Lord Yung Iji noticed something. So, this design has a single time system for the whole day. Razan has always used a different setup for day and night. Won't this confuse people? At that moment, Haiyang pushed open the door and entered. Everyone stood and bowed. Your humble servants greet the crown prince. Hyang, hearing their concerns, replied, the current timekeeping system changes with the seasons. It's inefficient. A single, unified system would be easier for everyone, wouldn't it? The officials nodded. True, but, Your Highness, why have you called us here? Without a word, Hyang set a thick stack of papers on the table before them. Would you mind helping me with some math problems? In his hands were sheets of calculations he'd prepared, his bright smile making the officials uneasy. Lord Zhang Ian-su of the Royal Infirmary and Lord Li from the Ministry of Justice were stunned, eyes wide as the prince handed out the problems. When it was Lord Yongichi's turn, he frowned nervously. What is this? Hyang responded, just a few easy questions. Like candy. Solve them first. Okay? The problems weren't so easy. Even these top mathematicians had to rack their brains. Lord Li Zhang scratched his head over a land area calculation. Baffled. Lord Zhang Ian-su, chin in hand, wished he had an abacus. When Hyang checked their work, he muttered, this is a disaster. The highest score is only 70. I've got to spread Arabic numerals here and they need to learn math too. He scratched his head. But I'm too busy to teach them. What now? Then he had a light bulb moment. If that's the case, I'll find some Arab mathematicians. 1 month later, at Tuchin Hall, the Crown Prince proudly unveiled his pendulum clock to his father. The king and ministers were stunned. With a confident smile, Hyang announced, this clock is to replace the water-powered ones. It'll be in the palace and all 6 ministries, so everyone in Ozan will know the time. The king, smiling broadly, ordered the Minister of Public Works, install this in the palace and all 6 ministries. The minister responded, yes, Your Highness. Other ministers, delighted, whispered among themselves, the Crown Prince has invented something remarkable again. Life will be so much easier. But the excitement didn't last. Once the new clocks were installed, the minister struggling to adjust to the new time system began showing up late to meetings at Tuchin Hall, much to the king's frustration. When they finally arrived, the king pointed at the clock. Minister of Personnel, Minister of Households, what time is it? Both ministers, ashamed, could only stammer apologies, practically begging forgiveness. Over at the Ministry of Rights, the head of the ministry was fuming. Why isn't this task done yet? A subordinate, bowing his head, pleaded. Please forgive me, my lord. Just a little more time. The head's face hardened. How is it not done? You promised it by 5 p.m. The subordinate had no answer, bowing again. I'm terribly sorry, my lord. Over at the Ministry of Public Works, things were no different. The head demanded, when will this report be finished? The terrified officials responded, if we may, we'll work until 7 p.m. to complete it. The head raised his voice. Are you serious? It's 7 a.m. now, not p.m. Are you all slacking off? The officials protested. No, my lord, we wouldn't dare. Outside, at a tavern near the Eastern Palace, even the commoners were frustrated. This new clock system is a curse. Who came up with it? I want to find them and give them a good thrashing. One man, throwing back his drink, grumbled. That useless Minister of Public Works. I quit. As the king strolled with Hyang, he said cheerfully, thank you, Hyang. Hyang looked up, confused. For what, father? The king chuckled. Thanks to you, the court has become much livelier. No more wasted time. Hyang bowed his head humbly. You're too kind, father. I'll keep working hard to bring you more useful things. The king ruffled his son's hair, laughing. You're too modest. I'm proud to have a son like you. After a pause, he asked, is there anything else you need to make your inventions? Hyang chuckled mischievously. To be honest, yes, there is something. The king's eyes lit up. Oh? Let me hear it. Remaining calm, Hyang replied, nothing big, father. Just a small, independent building. The king almost stumbled in surprise. A separate building? With a hopeful look, Hyang explained, yes, I need space to focus. While working on the clock, my desk was so cluttered with blueprints that I had to eat on the floor. The king, still unsure, hesitated. A whole building seems wasteful. Hyung, like a child on the verge of a tantrum, pleaded. If I had my own space, I could have made even more inventions by now, Hyung pleaded, like a kid on the verge of a tantrum. Seeing Hyung's pitiful expression, the king, flustered, finally relented. All right, I get it. But this isn't something I can just decide right away. Let me discuss it with the ministers first, and I'll get back to you. 5 days later, the Institute for Scientific and Technological Development of Ozen was officially established. When the ministers came to visit, they were speechless. Entering the tiny room, they felt a slight chill from a cool draft sweeping through the barely few square meters space. They exchanged glances, murmuring, "Is this really a government department? It's so small, it's barely bigger than a closet." Though a bit disappointed, Hyung stayed optimistic. "We're starting small, but the results will be grand. I guarantee no one will dare look down on us." One official asked, "So, what exactly are we supposed to do here?" "Good question. Come inside first." Hyung grinned, motioning them in. He presented a diagram of the institute's structure and, standing tall, introduced it with pride. "This is our organizational chart, our institute, where we'll conduct technical research to make Ozen stronger and more prosperous. I'll be the director. Under me, we'll have 2 divisions. First, the Division of Basic Science and Technical Research, which will handle core research. We'll call it the Basic Division. Then, there's the Division of Applied Science and Technical Research, which will apply our findings to real-life needs. We'll call that the Applied Division." The ministers murmured in admiration, and Hyung continued assigning tasks. Lord Dong, Lord YG, and the Minister of Public Works will join the Basic Division, while Lord Lee Chan will head the Applied Division. Lord Jiang will oversee military supplies and manage craftsmen from various departments to produce the necessary tools for research. One official, still unsure, asked, "I get it, but what exactly will we be working on?" "Great question," Hyung replied, jumping in. "The Basic Division will use mathematics to explore fields like metallurgy, chemistry, architecture, and more. The Applied Division's job will be to advance these results, elevating them based on what the Basic Division finds and existing knowledge." Jiang Ion-su hesitated. "Metallurgy and architecture, those are academic fields too?" Hyung replied confidently, "Absolutely. Only by understanding the theory can we come up with new ideas." Lord Yang nodded. "Understood, Your Highness." Hyung continued, "And if any of you know officials skilled in mathematics, bring them here. If we're short, we could even bring in Muslim scholars." Jiang Young-su looked puzzled, thinking, "Muslims? Aren't they just merchants from Saracen?" He voiced his concern. "If we employ Muslims, the ministers will surely oppose it. They're essential for our research," Hyung clarified. "If anyone objects, mention my name. Muslims have been here since the Silla dynasty, and trade with them started back then, extending through both the Korean and Joseon dynasties. They excel in mathematics, so they'll be valuable." Then Hyung proposed a new idea. "Let's improve our firearms." Lord Lee Chan was taken aback. "What?" Hyung chuckled, thinking, for a military man, there's no sweeter proposal than this. Lee Chan bowed. "I'll accomplish this at any cost." "Good," Hyung said. "But first, we need someone who understands firearms. Know anyone skilled in this area?" Lee recommended General Choi Hyson. He's the overseer of the Military Supplies Bureau and son of General Choi Susan, a former officer of Joseon. He's likely at the Ministry of War. Hyung's eyes lit up. "Then let's head straight to the Ministry of War." "Yes, Your Highness," Lee Chan responded. Scene transition to the Ministry of War. As soon as Hyung entered, an official approached. "Does the Crown Prince wish to see me?" It was none other than Overseer Choi Hyson of the Military Supplies Bureau, an expert in firearms. Hyung felt a bit shy meeting General Choi, thinking, this guy has an overwhelming aura. After a quick pause to steady himself, Hyung greeted him cheerfully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, General. I've heard much about you." But then, as he noticed Choi Hazen's stern face, Hyung could only offer a nervous smile, thinking, oh no, this doesn't look good. But despite his intimidating appearance, Choi Hyson wasn't as scary as he seemed. He smiled warmly. Thank you, Crown Prince. It's my honor to meet you. Then he asked, So, what brings you to the Ministry of War, Your Highness? Relieved, Hyang quickly invited General Choi to sit down. He then made an offer to both Lord Lichon and General Choi Hyson. Would you two like to join me in inventing something? General Choi, surprised, asked, What exactly do you mean, Your Highness? Hyang explained, I want to improve the weapons of Ozen's military. The word weapons seemed to grab Choi's full attention. That's right, Hyang continued. We can't compare ourselves to the military might of the Ming dynasty. And when it comes to close combat, Japan has also surpassed us. Do you agree? Convinced, General Choi nodded. That is true. Hyang went on. Furthermore, our financial situation is terrible, and we can't afford to recruit more soldiers. So, I believe the first step is to improve our weapon quality, then gradually increase our troops. General Choi offered his opinion. Forgive me, Your Highness, but the quality of Ozen's spears and swords is already excellent. Hyang reassured him. I know, but weapons aren't limited to just spears and swords. I'm talking about gunpowder-based weapons. Lord Li's eyes widened in shock. Your Highness means firearms and cannons? You plan to improve those? Seeing the mischievous grin on Hyang's face, both officials felt uneasy. A 10-year-old with this much confidence. What's going on here? They wondered. When I have a detailed plan, I'll explain everything, Hyang said. But first, I want to see how effective Ozen's cannons are. Can we organize a demonstration? Lord Li responded. A demonstration? That would require permission from the king. All right, I'll go ask my father, Hyang said quickly. Scene transition to the king. The king was quite surprised when he heard Hyang's request for a demonstration. Is this really necessary? If you're just asking for fun, I don't see the point. However, in the end, the demonstration was approved. On the day of the event, Hyang observed carefully, taking notes. The cavalry and archers began the demonstration, but something puzzled him. The soldiers' spears were shorter than he remembered. When the order to fire was given, the soldiers released their arrows, and the cavalry was energetic. But Hyang noticed something odd. Why are they pulling the horses back? Doesn't that waste all the momentum they just built? He thought the cavalry's task is to break through the enemy's first line, right? He sighed, thinking, the road ahead of me is long. Next came the firearms and cannon demonstration. Choi Hai-san, in his military uniform, looked incredibly impressive. Hyang's eyes lit up, feeling a surge of excitement. Finally, it's time. Let's get started already. But he wondered, why does the back of my neck feel so hot? The cannons were brought in one by one. The largest was called the Sky Cannon, followed by the Earth Cannon, and on the side, a mysterious handheld cannon, an improved version of the Sky Cannon. When the command to fire was given, the cannon shot out its projectile with a powerful boom. The king, delighted, exclaimed, What firepower! How far did that go? A nearby minister replied, About 1,300 paces, Your Highness. The king, beaming, said, This is fantastic, absolutely remarkable. He turned to Hyang. So, what do you think? Hyang was so deep in thought he didn't respond right away. The king called him several times before the crown prince finally snapped out of his thoughts and replied, Oh, I think it's amazing, father. All thanks to the generals and soldiers. Choi Hai-san, equally pleased, said humbly, The crown prince is too kind. After that, Hyang made another request. Father, may I speak with the cannon operators for a bit? I'd like to confirm a few things. The king, feeling suspicious, thought, what kind of trick is this boy up to now? The scene shifts to the soldiers lined up, cannons ready, and as the crown prince arrives, they all bow deeply. Greetings, Your Highness. The crown prince Hyang gives a gracious nod, saying, Thanks to your efforts, our nation enjoys peace. I am deeply grateful to each of you. The soldiers murmur humbly, Your Highness is too kind. But as he looks over them, King's eyes narrow slightly, noticing something odd. Wait, why does everyone's armor look different? Curious, he raises a hand. Did you all prepare your own armor? The soldiers respond in unison, Yes, Your Highness. Hyung nods slowly to himself, so that explains it. These guys had to bring their own armor. Makes sense, though, I suppose. It's the time of Roshan, after all. With a small shake of his head, he sets the armor issue aside for later and focuses back on the task at hand. Are all the cannons and handhelds here? He asks. General Choi steps forward and pulls a tarp aside, revealing an array of weapons lined up in an impressive display. Swords, spears, and cannons stacked neatly. Hing's face lights up with genuine excitement. Wow, I didn't expect to see this with my own eyes. The color is beautiful. Choi looks at him, confused, wondering, what is His Highness so thrilled about? But Hing's already stepped forward, examining the weapons with a keen eye. As he looks closer, he realizes they're still using wooden cannons without braces or stoppers to maximize the gunpowder's blast. He mutters to himself, yeah, it'll be quite a while before cannons with braces become the norm. It makes sense they're still using standard handheld cannons. Then something else catches his eye. He turns to Choi and points. Is that cannon made of wood with braces? Choi nods dutifully. Yes, Your Highness. Hyung strokes his chin thoughtfully, looking like an old scholar deep in thought. We're making improvements, but honestly, a full upgrade is long overdue. The question is, where do we even start? Deciding to save the cannons for later, he shifts his attention to the handhelds, peppering General Choi with rapid-fire questions. How effective are these handhelds, General? What kind of armor does the Jurchen army use? General Choi replies, yes, Your Highness. There are different levels of armor, but they typically wear either light or heavy armor. Hyung keeps the questions coming. And if they're in light armor and get hit by one of these handhelds, what happens? Choi looks thoughtful. I haven't witnessed it myself, but reports from the north say a Jurchen soldier was struck down at around 50 meters. Hyung nods, satisfied. Got it. I've seen enough here, let's head back. As they walk, Hing's mind is spinning with thoughts. There's a lot to consider here, but where should I start? After the drill, he turns to the soldiers and generals, offering a warm smile. You all did excellent work today. I've arranged food and drink, please. Enjoy yourselves. The soldiers cheer. Long live His Highness. Thank you, Your Highness. But Hyung, even as he watches them celebrate, can't shake his nagging curiosity. He suddenly blurts out, this isn't right. I'm too curious, I need answers. Without hesitation, he calls over 2 soldiers from the artillery team. They exchange nervous glances before replying, yes, Your Highness? Hing's grin turns mischievous. Follow me. I have a few questions for you. But before he dives into his interrogation, he says, sorry for keeping you from the feast. The soldiers quickly wave it off, saying, no need to apologize, Your Highness. Relieved, Hyung jumps in. Great. So tell me, when you use these handheld cannons, do you experience any issues? Is it uncomfortable? Or is there something difficult about using them? Please, don't hold back. One soldier steps forward, scratching his head. It's not uncomfortable exactly, but it does have its issues. Hyung raises an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh? Like what? The soldier explains. Well, the handheld cannon needs to be mounted on a pole to fire, but even the strongest artillerymen can barely fire 2 shots. Range and accuracy are also a problem. Close up, they work fine, but from a distance. Well, it's a bit of a gamble. Hyung nods, thinking deeply, then asks, may I hold it? He picks up the cannon pole, feeling its weight and the way it tilts forward. So the center of gravity leans forward. Is that just because it's so heavy? Curious, he asks, how heavy is this handheld cannon? Choi responds, 3 gons and 8 reals, Your Highness. Hyung continues, and the length? Choi hesitates slightly. They vary, but the shortest is about 4 feet. Hearing this, Hing's eyes widen. Wait, no standardized measurements? That's like having rulers of different lengths. Choi explains sheepishly. They're tribute items, Your Highness. Hyung sighs heavily, realizing it's not just a matter of weight, but a whole system problem. And how much gunpowder does each cannon use? Choi's answer leaves him momentarily speechless. Hong mutters, that much gunpowder? I think I need a doctor. Seeing his reaction, Choi looks concerned. Are you all right, Your Highness? Hyung waves it off. Fine, just surprised. With his questions answered, he nods. Thank you, General. Well done, everyone. The soldiers watch him leave, still puzzled. What's he so curious about? Isn't he just a kid? As they walk back, Hyung turns to Choi. General, do these handheld cannons require 2 people to fire? Choi nods. Typically, yes, Your Highness. Hyung presses. But isn't it possible for 1 person to handle it alone? Choi explains. It can be done, but it's complicated. The men have to tuck it under their arm or use their right hand while lighting the fuse with their left. Hyung sighs. That sounds incredibly inconvenient. Choi agrees. That's why we normally use 2 men, but it does drain our manpower. Nodding thoughtfully, Hyung says, let's focus on the handheld cannons first. He recalls his previous life as Kim Jin-ho in the US, where he'd seen his friend's private firearm collection, amazed at the power of even a small bullet propelled by a few grams of gunpowder. Back in Ozen, he thinks black powder isn't as powerful as modern smokeless powder, but it should still pack a punch. He mutters, should I make a sighting device? But can they even handle the recoil? Suddenly inspired, Hyung flings open the door, shouting, that's it. Start small and build up. He quickly informs the eunuch, I'm heading to the Ministry of War. Upon arrival, he finds General Choi in a strange position, balancing in a squat while reading. Is he reading while doing squats? Startled, Choi jumps up. Your Highness, I wasn't expecting you so soon. Waving it off, Hyung says, no worries, just a quick question. He coughs theatrically. General, is the thickness of the cannon fuse standardized? Choi nods. Yes, Your Highness. Hyung asks to see one, and after a moment's hesitation, Choi lights it for him. The fuse sputters out immediately. Hyung raises an eyebrow. Can I see a few more? Choi, catching on, looks worried. Is there an issue, Your Highness? Hyung nods. Yes, General. The fuse can't withstand the wind, right? Choi sighs. You're right, but they just relight it. Hyung challenges. But in battle, can they afford that delay? He orders, General, send word to standardize the fuse length time is life out there. Impressed, Choi marvels. How does he think of these things? Elsewhere, the Minister of Revenue bumps into Lee Chan, and as they walk, he asks, I haven't seen the Crown Prince around. What's he up to? Lee Chan replies, he's been tied up with a very important experiment in the Research Institute for the last 5 days. Not long ago, he even requested mercury from the Military Supply Department. The Minister of Revenue, eyes widening in shock, sputtered, Mercury? Why would he need mercury? Scene shifts to the Crown Prince. Hyung had summoned the ministers for a discussion. It's been a while since we last met, he began, then addressed the Minister of Public Works directly. How's the progress on modifying the calendar? The minister replied, positive progress, Your Highness. We've identified discrepancies between our calendar and the Ming dynasties, and we're working on adjustments. Hearing this, Hyung felt some relief but pressed. Good. So when can we expect results? The minister answered, it should be ready by winter, Your Highness. At the word winter, Hyung's face clouded. That's too slow, he barked. The latest this should be completed is by the Mid-Autumn Festival. The Minister of Public Works was taken aback, thinking it impossible to meet the deadline. Hyung, visibly tense, continued, I've already told you use my name to urge them. Mid-Autumn Festival. No exceptions. Bowing, the minister replied quietly, understood, Your Highness. Hyung then turned to Generals Choi Hai-san and Lee Chan. I have a very important task for you both. Both generals, already sweating, cautiously asked, what is it, Your Highness? Wait a moment. Hyung retrieved a scroll and unfurled it to reveal an intricate firearm design. He grinned confidently. With this, the battlefield will be completely different in the future. Lee Chan's eyes widened at the design, while the other ministers stared in shock. Then, turning to both generals, he added, let's work together to bring this weapon into reality. Both generals hesitated, clearly deep in thought. Minister Ian Su, having some doubts, asked, in this drawing, if you pull the ring at the bottom, it seems that the curved part at the top would move. So how would the fuse ignite? Rather than directly answering, Hyung asked Minister Jong, if it were you, how would you solve this? Jong thoughtfully replied, if it were me, I'd tie the fuse to this spot here and place gunpowder on a plate here. When we pull the crescent-shaped part, the tied fuse would ignite the gunpowder, sending the flame down the barrel boom. Impressed, Hyang nodded. Minister Zhang, your insight is remarkable. Now, Li Chan understood the design as well, and General Choi added, it truly is brilliant. We'd no longer need an extra person to light the fuse, reducing the firing time significantly. Pleased, Hyang continued, exactly. He smiled, knowing they now grasped the process. Still pondering, Minister Zhang pointed out, but, Your Highness, in this drawing, there's no fuse or gunpowder plate, just a protrusion here. How will the gunpowder ignite? Chuckling, Hyang explained, allow me to clarify. According to the Westerners, this part here, shaped like a rooster's head, is called the cock-the-firing mechanism. They call this section the prison, where the gunpowder cap sits. Minister Zhang nodded. Ah, so you just move the trigger to strike the cap? Exactly, Hyang replied. When it strikes the cap, ignition will happen instantly. At that moment, General Choi raised another concern. But Your Highness, our current gunpowder has serious issues. Producing it is dangerous, storage is tricky, and if the ingredients rub against each other, they could explode. The army mixes sand into it to prevent moisture absorption. With the moisture sensitivity, I'm concerned about using the cap you mentioned. Hyang replied confidently, General Choi, your concerns are valid, but I have something that should solve these issues. He pulled out a bag of powder, the contents unknown to the ministers. This, Hyang announced, is my own creation silver powder. Silver powder? Asked Minister Jiang, confused. Does it contain real silver? With a dramatic flair, Hyang sprinkled some of the powder onto a piece of paper, imitating a modern-day flourish. No, not silver. It's a blend of saltpeter, mercury, and alcohol. He handed Deng Ig a hammer, smirking. Judging by that look on your face, you're curious. Wanna give it a strike? Deng Ig took the hammer and, puzzled, struck the paper covered in the powder. A second later, smoke burst from the paper, making him leap back, shouting, Oh my God! Hyang then turned to General Choi and Minister Li, asking, What do you think? Overjoyed, General Choi exclaimed, With this, we can absolutely use it. But how did you even think of such a thing, Your Highness? Hyang laughed, hugging the general. What can I say? I'm just that clever. Turning serious, he added, This is only a sample. For practical use, we'll position it here. What do you think? General Choi hesitated before asking, Could I try holding it, Your Highness? Of course. Choi held the gun, carefully aiming. Is this correct, Your Highness? Watching, the other ministers admired him, one of them remarking, General Choi looks incredible. So stylish. Hyang chuckled to himself, amused. These old men. Li John then offered his opinion. If we use this weapon, the system of firing multiple rounds won't be practical anymore. A single-shot approach would be best. The Minister of Public Works raised a question. But Your Highness, wouldn't single shot make it hard to hit the target? Minister Zhang took the gun and examined it. This protrusion seems like a sight for aiming, and the gun's length would help accuracy. I get it now. But the design intrigues me. This gun isn't cast. Is it? That's right, Hyang replied. It'll be forged, not cast. So notify the military supply department in advance. A full day passed as Hyang and the ministers discussed the gun's construction until late into the night. Scene shifts to the palace, where the king, deep in thought, asked his eunuch, I haven't seen the crown prince around lately. What's he up to? Your Highness, he's just arrived. As Hyang entered, the ministers muttered, Speak of the devil, and he appears. Politely, Hyang greeted his father. I hope you're well, Your Majesty. I haven't seen you around. What have you been doing? Asked the king. I was just about to report my current research, Hyang replied. The eunuch presented a book, which Hyang introduced as a report on the achievements of the Institute of Science and Technological Development. The king scanned the pages, astonished. Is this all true? Yes, father. Every word. Shocked, the king exclaimed, You've developed a method to adjust the Ming dynasty calendar for Rosen? Yes, Your Majesty. Hyang continued. Remember the timing mishap during the Gucci Cree ritual a few years ago? The king nodded. Yes, a 15-minute delay. The eclipse prediction was off. Hyang explained. That incident happened because the Ming calendar didn't align with Rosen's. We needed a suitable adjustment formula. After reading further, the king asked, And this astronomical observation tool, what is it? It observes celestial events, just as the name suggests. Confused, the Minister of Revenue muttered, I don't understand any of this. Hyang, slightly disappointed, replied cheerfully, I'll submit a detailed report on it later, Your Majesty. The king paused, deep in thought. This kid, even considering relations with the Ming dynasty, observing celestial bodies could indeed complicate their relations, thought Hyang. Instead of an independent calendar, I propose adjusting our lunar calendar based on Ming methods, he suggested. When this is sorted, we'll discuss it further, replied the king. Hyang bowed, hiding his disappointment. Yes, father. Curious about the lack of military updates, the king asked, Crown Prince, I see no report on military matters. Hesitant, Hyang replied, that research is being conducted under strict secrecy. We need more time, Your Majesty. The Minister of Revenue thought, what on earth are they working on? Then, Hyang said something that made the king furious. Although we're behind schedule, we'd like to request additional funds. Barely containing his anger, the king said, show me results first, then maybe. Late at night in the king's chambers, still restless, he thought, should I wait for Hing's report or visit him now? Just then the eunuch entered. The crown prince has arrived. Let him in. The king's gaze sharpened. Let him in immediately. As Hyang entered, the king leaned forward, asking gently, why so late? Hyang, fully aware of his father's curiosity, respectfully replied, forgive me for coming at such a late hour, father. I don't have much to report, but I do have one request. I need military officers and soldiers from the training unit. A few days later, the requested officers and soldiers were discreetly assigned to the research institute, their lips sealed about the work. Once they arrived, they were quickly moved to a secured location, surrounded by fences and guarded with the highest level of security. Each day, loud explosions rumbled from within. At the entrance, Hyang had boldly placed a sign, Area 51. The king, unfamiliar with the term, didn't catch the reference to the modern world U.S. research facility. One of the ministers muttered, I'm not sure what Area 51 is, Your Majesty, but since that sign went up, a new phrase has started catching on, game changer. Puzzled, the king asked, game changer? What does that mean? The minister shrugged. I'm not quite sure, Your Majesty, but I hear it's a Western expression. One minister muttered, looking puzzled. Since the establishment of Area 51, Hing's routine had transformed entirely. He'd started rising at the crack of dawn, around 6 or 7, and after completing his morning duties as crown prince, he'd head directly to the Military Supply Department's Research Institute. During this period, Hyang was so busy that he'd even taken to riding a horse through the streets, cutting down travel time and creating quite a spectacle. Seeing the crown prince galloping by had become something of a new attraction in Hanyang, and his busy, focused expression left passers-by both curious and mystified. Two officials caught sight of Hyang riding past and exchanged glances. What on earth could the crown prince be working on that's so pressing? One wondered aloud. Back at court, the concern had only grown. The Minister of Revenue, looking uneasy, addressed the king. Your Majesty, I fear we can't delay any longer. We must investigate what the crown prince is working on. Another minister quickly added, yes, we have to make sure the budget is being used appropriately. The king, sharing their unease, looked around the room. Does everyone agree? The ministers nodded, and the king sighed. I've been thinking the same. He straightened and ordered, summon the crown prince immediately. Yes, Your Majesty, replied the chief official, bowing as he turned to carry out the command. When Hyang appeared before his father, he bowed respectfully. Father, please forgive me, he began. The matter I'm working on concerns the national security of Ozan. That's why I have no choice but to keep it secret until we achieve results. It's a top-secret issue. The king considered his words, then replied, I understand, but however confidential it may be, I can't allocate further funds without a report. Two ministers exchanged startled glances. Was the king really demanding an investigation? Noticing Hing's concerned expression, the king softened. I'll give you time to prepare. How much time do you need? Hyang took a deep breath, realizing he had no other choice now. 5 days, father. I only need 5 days. The king agreed with a nod. Very well. In 5 days, we will inspect the research institute. Scene shifts to 5 days later. On the appointed day, all the ministers and officials gathered in front of the research institute, anxiously awaiting the king's arrival. As soon as he stepped out, they all bowed in unison. Hyang greeted him with a broad smile. "Father, you're here." The king replied, "Yes, I am. It seems the research has expanded significantly. There are a lot more officials now, but they don't look too well. Everyone seems exhausted. Or am I imagining things?" "Father, you must be mistaken," Hyang quickly responded. "Let's head inside." As they entered, the king's eyes widened at the display of strange items. He turned to Hyang, confused. "Aren't these the creations of Minister Zhang? Why do they look so small?" Hyang chuckled. "Those are just display models. They don't actually function." The king, still puzzled, asked, "Is that all? This doesn't seem to match the budget that was spent." With a mischievous glint in his eye, Hyang dashed over to a door leading to a hidden room. Before opening it, he called out, "Father, that was only the beginning. The real results are right in here." The door creaked open, revealing a room lined with shelves displaying various unfamiliar objects. The king's eyes lit up. Stepping inside, he excitedly asked, "What are these things?" "Let's go in quickly." But Hyang gently tugged on his father's sleeve. "Father, what you're about to see is highly classified. Except for you and the ministers, all other officials must remain outside." The king nodded, understanding, and instructed the other officials to wait as he and the ministers entered. Inside, the king looked around in astonishment and asked Yun and the ministers, "Did you and the team at the Research Institute create all of this?" Hyang quickly answered, "Yes, father. They've worked very hard." The king smiled, impressed. "I see. Well done, all of you." He then picked up a curious tool and asked, "What is this long rod for?" "That," Hyang replied, "is a leveler. It's used to measure balance horizontally and vertically." He added, "But it's still a prototype. If the iron ball lands precisely in the center, that means everything is perfectly level." The king examined the tool closely. "I see. But why is such accuracy necessary?" "It's essential for construction, father," Hyang explained. The king looked surprised. "Construction? Tell me more." "Yes," Hyang continued. "It's crucial for assembling astronomical instruments. The surface must be perfectly level to get accurate measurements." The king nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. So, this tool could also be useful for building government structures, right?" Hyang replied cautiously, "Please forgive me, father, but it's still too early to use it for that purpose. The leveler is still experimental. When it's ready, I'll submit a full report." The king nodded, satisfied. "I'll await your report." Then he picked up a model of a ship, examining it with interest. "Is this a model of a battleship?" "Yes, father," Hyang replied. "It's a scaled model of the largest battleship." The king looked closely and frowned. "This ship looks odd. It doesn't resemble any Ozen design." "That's because it's modeled after a Western ship, father, built to the same scale as their largest warship." The king, holding the model, looked amazed. "What? The Westerners have built a ship this enormous?" He looked closer. "What about the oars?" Hyang laughed. "That ship doesn't need oars, father. It runs entirely on wind power." The king, now holding another model, asked, "And what about its weapons?" "It's armed with cannons, father," Hyang answered. "It could carry up to 80. The king looked stunned. 80 cannons? Incredible. He turned to his son, proud. "Crown Prince, you continue to amaze me." Hyang, delighted, replied, "I will make you proud, father." The ministers nearby looked equally awestruck. Just then, the king noticed a simpler model beside the warship. "What's this one? Is it a bowl of noodles?" Hyang burst into laughter. "No, father. It represents an iron ship." The king and ministers gasped. "An iron ship?" Months before, Hyang had first mentioned his ambition to build an iron ship, and the ministers had been just as astonished. They'd asked, "An iron ship? That's impossible. Everyone knows iron sinks in water." But Hyang had replied confidently, "It's not impossible. We simply haven't found the right way." Curious, they'd asked him to explain further. Hyang had called for the eunuch. "Bring me a bronze cup and a large basin of water." The eunuch returned, "Yes, your highness," placing the items before him. Conducting a simple experiment for the officials, Hyang demonstrated. See? Even iron can float on water. He explained, if the object is solid and touches the water with a small surface, it will sink. But if it's hollow with enough surface contact, it can float. In other words, if we keep the mass the same but increase the volume, the density decreases. One of the ministers, stroking his beard, asked, "What's density?" The Minister of Public Works, standing nearby, chimed in, "We learned about this at the Foundational Institute. If we use thin, strong iron sheets and attach them together, we could build an iron ship." Hyang nodded. Exactly. It's that simple. However, another minister raised a concern. But how do we securely join the iron sheets while ensuring water doesn't seep through? Smiling innocently, Hyang replied, "That's your research task. I leave it to you." The ministers silently despaired, wondering if they should just resign. Later, Hyang explained to the king why the wooden model was there. The Minister of Revenue respectfully said, "Your Majesty, I don't think building an iron ship will be easy." The king asked, "But do you think we can find a way?" Confidently, Hyang replied, "Of course. We already know the principle. Now we just need to figure out the method." The minister continued, "But, Crown Prince, the issue is that we don't know how long this will take." King Taejang then asked, "Will I see an iron ship while I'm still on the throne?" At this, Hyang hesitated but replied, "Not only might father not see it, but I might not see it during my reign either." Shocked, the king exclaimed, "What? Even so, do you still think we should pursue this research, despite not knowing the time or resources it will require?" Filled with confidence, Hyang replied, "For the future of Yoshin, we must. Father, please trust me." Taken aback by Hing's resolve, the king and ministers could only comment, "This boy has conviction." One minister added, "But everything strange he's done so far has yielded good results." The king sighed, "All right, continue. But we can't just pour time and money into this blindly. You'll need to submit a detailed plan and provide periodic progress reports." Smiling, Hyang responded, "Yes, father." As the king examined more models, he asked, "I've been wondering, what's that odd thing in the corner?" "Oh, that's Heron's steam ball, father," Hyang replied. "A steam ball? It looks like this?" The king asked, surprised. Hyang explained, "It's a measuring device created by a famous Western scholar long ago." The king then added, "Even if we manage to build an iron ship, there's another issue. The heavier the ship, the harder it'll be to move with just sails and oars. How will we make it move?" The minister nodded. "That's another challenge." Full of excitement, Hyang replied, "Of course, Yong Shin would have thought of that already. I've also considered it, which is why I want to start a new research project with all of you ministers." Calling for the eunuch, he instructed, "Bring the device I requested from the military supply department." The eunuch obediently replied, "Yes, your highness," and brought out a spinning device. Seeing it, the ministers were amazed. "It's spinning like a wheel and speeding up." Hyang asked, "Have you ever seen how a pot lid moves when rice is cooking? The energy from the water and fire can move even that heavy lid. I'd like to call this a steam engine." As the model steam engine ran, the ministers were astonished by how quickly it spun, like a whirlwind. The Minister of Public Works exclaimed, "With just a little water and fire, it spins like that. This is worth researching. If perfected, we could use it for ships, making them less reliant on wind and requiring fewer rowers." Hyang waved his hand, saying, "This isn't just for ships." Confused, Minister Li Zhan asked, "You mean it has other uses?" Hyang quickly responded, "What if we used it instead of horses for carriages?" The Minister of Public Works and Li Zhan were stunned at the thought of replacing horse-drawn carriages with a steam engine. Scene shifts to King Taejang as Hyang presents his invention. "You want to use this to pull a cart?" "I don't understand," the king said. Hyang asked, "What part confuses you, father?" The king expressed his concerns. "To use this, we'll need to constantly supply it with water and fire, right? If so, we'd need to carry a large amount of both on the cart, leaving no room for cargo." Thinking to himself, Hyang noted the king's sharpness but outwardly responded calmly, "I understand, father, but this steam engine generates significant power for its size. It could pull more than just one cart." Still skeptical, the king asked, "Many carts? Is that even possible?" With a confident smile, Hyung replied, "Let me show you, father." He eagerly opened the door to the secret room. The king and ministers were awestruck, exclaiming, "What are all these things?" Hyung thought, "This is my 21st century passion, the model railroad." He then said, "Allow me to demonstrate the steam engine's capability." He ordered the eunuch to prepare the steam-powered locomotive. At first, the king was puzzled. "You attached a steam engine to wheels?" Lighting the fire confidently, Hyung replied, "All right, let's start the demonstration." He added coal to the furnace, and as steam built up, the ministers held their breath, waiting. Soon, the model train began moving along the tracks. Overjoyed, the king celebrated, "It's moving! It's really working!" Hyung smiled and said, "This is just a model, but I'll do my best to apply it in real life. If successful, we could travel from Hanyang to Busan in a day, reaching the farthest corners of Yoshun in a single day. The heartbeat of Yoshun will be revived." Still amazed, the king asked, "What do you mean by reviving the heartbeat of Yoshun?" Hyung explained, "Currently, due to mountainous terrain, people are stuck where they're born, living and dying on the same land. But with cross-country trains, we'd usher in a new era, bringing benefits to everyone." In awe, ministers Kim Young and Mensa Young remarked, "It sounds like a dream." The king, however, remained contemplative. Hyung observed his father's expression, noting the promise of success and the significant resources required. Acknowledging this, Hyung requested the Minister of Public Works to present the development plan. The minister and another official retrieved a large stack of plans and placed them on the table. King Taejang could barely believe his eyes. It was an enormous pile of documents. Opening the first one, he found a comprehensive development strategy for the entire country, with so many details it made his head spin. He muttered, "I hate cool pens. These are strategic plans to strengthen Yoshun, considering geography, economic conditions, population, and resources," Hyung explained. Overwhelmed, the king counted silently, realizing there were 42 volumes in total. He remarked, "Well, they're worth reading," then ordered the left prime minister to review them with other ministers. Afterward, Hyung made another request. "Father, I have one more petition. The research institute is severely understaffed. None of us are getting enough rest." Intrigued, the king asked the Minister of Public Works to verify. Near tears, the minister replied, "The Crown Prince is managing multiple projects. There's too much work, too few people, and barely any time for rest." The king, still curious, asked, "Can't you find more people?" The minister responded, "Rumors of the heavy workload have spread, so no one dares join. Initially, many came for potential promotions, but every new project adds to the workload. In just 6 months, we've created so much yet are overwhelmed." The king, frowning, seemed ready to scold but then smiled and said, "Hyung, you're quite diligent." Grinning, Hyung replied, "Father, you are truly wise." Now understanding the situation, the king promised, "I'll help resolve the staffing issue, but since this research demands substantial funds, we must discuss it seriously." Hyung, a bit downcast, replied, "I understand, father." The king then added, "It seems you haven't shown me everything. I've already allocated a significant budget to the institute, so this can't be all." Noticing his father's look, Hyung immediately understood. As expected from father, Hyung thought. The king, with a hint of intrigue, suggested, "Shall we go check it out?" Referring, of course, to Area 51. Early in the morning, the king and Hyung rode their horses together within the palace grounds. "Riding together like this is quite nice, don't you think?" the king said. Hyung responded cheerfully, "I think so too, father." After a while, the king curiously asked, "What does Area 51 even mean?" Realizing the question caught him off guard. Hyung chuckled and replied, "Oh, it's nothing important. It just has a nice ring to it." He laughed a bit awkwardly, which made the king raise a puzzled eyebrow, though he didn't press further. When they arrived at the entrance, the king remarked, "It seems we're here." "Yes, father," Hyung confirmed as they neared the gate. 2 guards halted them, loudly commanding, "Halt! Only those with proper authorization may enter. Present your token." The king, caught off guard, replied, "What? How insolent!" Hyung quickly intervened. "Father, even I can't enter without a token. Security here is paramount. so please don't take offense. He then produced a token marked with a yin-yang symbol. Upon seeing it, the guards saluted and stepped aside, calling out, "Permission granted." The king watched in bewilderment, thinking, what kind of protocol is this? Once they had passed security, they continued riding. Observing the strict measures, the king remarked, "Hyung, you seem to take security here very seriously." Hyung responded, "It's essential to prevent secrets from slipping out, father." The king thought to himself, what exactly is he working on here that needs such precautions? At the entrance to the display area, they were greeted by General Choi Hai-san and the chief steward, who stood at attention and saluted. The king noted this posture is different from before, but very formal. General Choi Hai-san bowed politely and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. Everyone has worked diligently." Noticing that the soldiers' uniforms looked distinctive, the king grew more curious. "What exactly is the main work conducted here?" he asked. General Choi replied respectfully, "We are focused on enhancing and developing explosives, Your Majesty. Additionally, we're working on advancing cannons and firearms, creating new weaponry, and refining military strategies. In short, all military-related research happens here." Nodding, the king said, "I understand." Growing eager, he continued, "I'd like to see what you've been working on. General, would you lead the way?" General Hai-san gestured forward. "This way, Your Majesty," he said, adding, "From here on, we must continue on foot." He then requested the guards to open the gate for the king's entry. The king wondered to himself, what lies beyond this gate that warrants such stringent measures? General Choi led the king and Hyung into a large open area filled with military defense equipment. Astonished, the king exclaimed, "What is this? Isn't that gunpowder?" "Yes, Your Majesty," General Hai-san responded. "We've developed a new type of gunpowder, much stronger than what Joseon currently uses." Stroking his beard thoughtfully, the king listened as General Choi requested permission to explain and led him to inspect the weapons more closely. As they walked, General Choi began, "This powder, resembling dirt in color, is our original gunpowder, simply called original gunpowder." He held up a sample and continued, "And here we have a stronger version, twice as potent, derived from the original." The king took the sample, noting its darker hue, and asked, "What's different about it?" General Choi explained, "Allow me to clarify, Your Majesty. As with current gunpowder, we mix the ingredients and sprinkle them with water to bind. Once dried, it's ground and sifted. Up to this point, the process is identical." He paused before adding, "However, the next step differs. The sifted powder is then mixed with graphite." The king's eyes widened, recalling his earlier request to miners. "So graphite was what you needed?" "Precisely, Your Majesty," General Choi confirmed. "And its purpose?" the king asked. The general continued, "It serves several purposes. When combined with gunpowder, it prevents moisture absorption and reduces the risk of premature explosion. It also eliminates the need for sulfur." "Eliminates sulfur? But without sulfur, can it still explode?" the king asked in surprise. "Yes, Your Majesty," General Choi assured. The king raised an eyebrow. "Sulfur has been a staple in gunpowder for centuries. Are you sure it's safe to omit it?" General Choi explained, "By omitting sulfur, the gunpowder acquires a unique trait. However, it cannot be ignited with a standard fuse." The king, taken aback, asked, "Then how is it ignited?" General Choi held up an object and replied, "With this, Your Majesty." The king inspected the unfamiliar item as General Choi introduced it. "We call it a frizzen, or a bronze firing cap, which holds the crown prince's special gunpowder." "A different powder just for ignition? Isn't that overly complicated?" the king asked. "Rather than explain further, Your Majesty, I've prepared a demonstration," Choi Hai-san replied. "Please follow me to the testing area." Upon arriving at the grounds, the king and ministers were struck by the vast size of the space. "I see scarecrows in the distance. Are those the targets?" the king inquired. General Choi began arranging the demonstration. "Yes, Your Majesty. Let's begin." Two soldiers armed with the new firearms stepped forward. The ministers, unfamiliar with the weapons, looked puzzled. "What are those strange-looking items?" they murmured. Hyung chuckled. "Those are our new guns." The soldiers loaded the gunpowder and ammunition while General Choi explained each step to the king. They're using the bronze firing cap to ignite the powder, he said as the soldiers aimed. At the command, fire, the soldiers pulled the triggers. Bullets shot through the air, hitting the targets with impressive force. The power of the shot left the king and ministers speechless in awe. Remarkable power, they whispered. Even at a distance, it hasn't lost its force. Watching the display, Hyung proudly noted, sulfur can't match this. Comparing the guns to bows, he continued, though guns have limited range, this weapon overcomes that limitation with sheer power. It's the ultimate weapon. The officials, equally impressed, suggested, let's call it the armored weapon cannon. Hyung then turned to General Choi Hai-san. The name suits it well. Bring it to me. I want to examine it up close. However, General Choi hesitated. Your Highness, before that, may I present another type of explosive? Slightly puzzled, Hyung asked, Another type of explosive? What do you mean? The king asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Choi Hessen responded, yes, your majesty. To the left, we have the standard gunpowder we use. Next to it is an explosive called explosive silver, which the crown prince developed for use with bronze spears. There's also cotton gunpowder, made from cotton fabric. And on the far left, we have an advanced explosive called armored gunpowder, an improvement on cotton gunpowder. Additionally, we have a special explosive oil, also created by the crown prince. The king's expression grew concerned. Explosive silver? Does it use real silver? He asked, worried about the expense. The crown prince quickly reassured him. No, your majesty. We used mercury. While mercury is valuable, it's more accessible than silver, and only a small amount is needed for detonation. Relieved, the king replied, good to know, but what exactly is explosive oil? At the king's command, a servant brought forth a wooden box containing the explosive oil. As the box was opened, General Choi cautioned both the king and the crown prince to step back due to its potential danger. Slowly, he revealed the oil to the king. The king marveled at the creation. You've developed something remarkable, he praised. The crown prince, though proud, replied humbly, Father, you flatter me, but given the state of Joseon, we can't use this weapon just yet. The king, surprised, asked, why not? The crown prince explained, this explosive is extremely sensitive to impacts during transportation. If the barrels were to collide or experience heavy vibrations, it could detonate instantly. Additionally, in the spring or summer heat, production becomes almost impossible due to the concentrated acid needed in the process, making it extremely dangerous. The king frowned. It certainly sounds like a troublesome weapon, he admitted. General Choi then added, that's why we developed armored gunpowder, which combines cotton gunpowder, explosive oil, and citrus oil in a specific ratio. The king turned to the crown prince, slightly alarmed. You're combining it with explosive oil? Didn't you just say it's difficult to use? Choi Hessen clarified. The cotton gunpowder and citrus oil neutralize the explosive oil's volatility, your majesty. Finally understanding, the king asked, why call it armored gunpowder? General Choi hesitated before replying, I'm not entirely sure myself. The crown prince quickly interjected. It's thanks to your majesty's support that our soldiers have access to such powerful explosives. That's why it's named as a tribute. Silently, the crown prince thought to himself, I could never reveal that the name was inspired by historical methods from elsewhere. Overjoyed, the king praised the crown prince repeatedly. Your contributions are invaluable, my son. This new gun and explosive will undoubtedly become a powerful asset for Joseon. Our nation will grow stronger and more secure. The king then turned to the left minister. How will mass production proceed? The left minister responded, first, we need to determine the production costs. Your majesty, what are the expenses? The crown prince replied, the cost is about 30% higher than that of standard armored gunpowder. However, by using only half the amount, we can achieve the same power. The challenge for Joseon is procuring large amounts of saltpeter and sulfur, and we need high-grade cotton fabric without fibers. The biggest obstacle, however, is that explosive oil's main ingredient is citrus oil, extracted from pig and cow fat. The king, both shocked and disheartened, said, oh no, without a petrochemical industry, I almost wish I didn't know that such a powerful explosive could be made. Sensing his father's disappointment, The Crown Prince gently encouraged him. Father, don't give up. Abandoning our national defense would lead to ruin. The king replied, who wouldn't understand that? But given Joseon's current situation, it's difficult to know the right way forward. The Crown Prince reminded him bluntly, Father, wasn't the whole purpose of these reforms to overcome times like these? At that moment, the Crown Prince continued, right now, I, along with General Choi, Lord Leitrim, and numerous other officials, artisans and Master Yongbei Toa, are all striving to find solutions. Surviving this hardship is a challenge, but giving up means certain failure. The king, hearing these words, felt his determination renewed. Smiling, he said, you're absolutely right. From the day I took the throne, I vowed to give my all for Joseon's prosperity. Addressing his officials, he declared, my loyal subjects, focus your minds and dedicate yourselves to the success of our reforms. Deeply moved by his words, the officials responded in unison, we pledge to give our utmost efforts. The king replied, good, we stand united. Years later, the officials would often sigh and say, if only we hadn't inspected Area 51 that day, we wouldn't be so overwhelmed now. Talanjiai Hoang Hai would laugh and slap his mouth, joking, I really brought this upon us. Truly, disaster comes from one's own words. Returning to the events at Area 51, before leaving, King Chung and Ion, unable to hide his satisfaction, turned to the Crown Prince and said, this is truly remarkable. I'll spare no resources to support this endeavor. Find a way to mass-produce the gunpowder. I want to see all of Joseon's soldiers equipped with these state-of-the-art weapons soon. The Crown Prince smiled and replied, I obey your command. But as the king glanced at the artisans' pale faces and weary bodies, he couldn't help but feel concerned. All of this is due to their dedication and sacrifice, he thought. Then he turned to General Choi and asked, explain how the musket was completed. With a tear nearly escaping in pride, General Choi joyfully responded, yes, your majesty. Crafting a musket with rifling required custom-made tools. The Crown Prince recounted how two artisans had nervously discussed the task, asking, the Crown Prince wants a rifling rod made. Should we use the old anvil? And how, soon after, they received the necessary materials, ready to fulfill their orders. The artisans worked tirelessly, following each precise instruction given by the Crown Prince. After filling the gaps, make sure to file it smooth and check the frame carefully, he had reminded them, and with unity, they replied, yes, we understand. The Crown Prince remained vigilant, urging, hurry and get it perfect. Through their hard work, they completed 5 prototype muskets. Hyung praised their efforts, saying, these are true masterpieces, born of blood and sweat. At Area 51, the Crown Prince stood, observing silently with a determined gaze. Everyone there knew that today's trials weren't just gun tests. They were steps that could decide Joseon's future. The Crown Prince's calm yet commanding voice cut through the heavy atmosphere. Let's begin testing its actual performance. First, let's see if it can withstand the gunpowder. Yes, your highness, they replied. The Crown Prince suggested, the old musket used 1 hectogram of powder. Let's start with half that amount. Everyone nodded in agreement, knowing the importance of each step. General Choi Hai-san gave a firm command, fire! 2 bullets shot from the barrel, cutting through the air. All eyes followed the trajectory. The Crown Prince, unable to hide his anticipation, quickly asked, what's the result? General Choi, pleased and slightly tense, reported, half a hectogram of armored gunpowder along with half of the secondary powder performed well. Given the musket's purpose, increasing to 2 hectograms seems unnecessary. Satisfied, the Crown Prince responded, good, now let's reduce the amount to find the ideal charge. Let's use 40 paces as our standard range. Yes, your highness, they replied. Under the Crown Prince's direction, more musket tests were conducted, with each step advancing Joseon's strength and future possibilities. Leitrim's eyes lit up with excitement as he realized the results. The bullet hit the target at 40 paces. With this power, it might even reach targets farther out. The Crown Prince nodded, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Indeed, he replied calmly. Leitrim, energized, proposed, then let's test it at 50 paces this time. This is thrilling. On command, 2 bullets shot through the air with a powerful crack, sending a faint layer of smoke drifting through the air, a testament to the musket's potential. Li Jun, unable to contain his excitement, called out, "Your Highness!" The secondary gunpowder pushed the bullet to pierce the target at 70 paces. "It's incredible!" But just as quickly, his tone shifted, concern clouding his face. "However, this is only a partial success." The sudden change drew a curious frown from the Crown Prince. "What do you mean?" he asked. Li Jun continued, "We've fired over 20 shots, but they're inconsistent, none hit precisely. The bullet's trajectory seems unstable, affecting accuracy." The Crown Prince nodded thoughtfully. "Sharp observation. As I thought, it's time to introduce them to something else." Breaking his contemplation, the Crown Prince asked aloud, "Is that the only problem? Cleaning and reloading seem to take a long time. Why not try firing without those steps?" Li Jun, taken aback, asked, "But, Your Highness, if we skip those, wouldn't the bullets just fall out?" "Not if we make the bullets fit the barrel snugly. Try it," the Crown Prince directed. "Yes, Your Highness," General Choi replied, though he couldn't hide a small hint of frustration. "We already know the answer, so why ask?" he thought. Observing their puzzled faces, the Crown Prince simply smiled to himself, thinking, "Letting them work this out will teach them better than any explanation. Let them experience what I learned from Extubital, build their skills and their confidence." After some time spent implementing the Crown Prince's suggestions, General Choi returned with a report. "We tried it, Your Highness, but the gunpowder residue is clogging up the barrel, making the next shot impossible." The Crown Prince considered this. "It seems cleaning is unavoidable, then. General Choi, think about it on a battlefield. Will there be time to clean the barrel with the enemy charging?" Caught off guard, General Choi hesitated, admitting, "You're right, Your Highness." Embarrassment flashed across his face, while beside him, Li Jun scratched his head in thought, muttering, "Then what do we do?" The Crown Prince observed, feeling mildly disappointed. "Must I guide them again?" But before he could speak, General Choi had a sudden inspiration. "What if we carve grooves in the barrel?" he exclaimed. "Grooves?" Li Jun looked at him wide-eyed. "Yes." General Choi pointed to a nearby stream. "The water flows along the grooves, channeling its path. Gunpowder's flames could flow the same way. If we carved grooves in the barrel, the residue might exit along with the flame." Li Jun's eyes brightened. "It's worth a try." The Crown Prince, pleased by this insight, thought, "Looks like I don't need to step in after all." However, as they were setting up, a craftsman approached with a worried look. "General Choi, how will we carve these grooves?" The question struck them like a splash of cold water, dampening their excitement. General Choi muttered, "Back to square one." The Crown Prince chuckled, knowing their work was far from over. Progress is a journey, each step forward is still a success. Undeterred, the artisans spent long nights brainstorming. Finally, they developed a tool for carving grooves, fashioning muskets with various configurations from 3 to 15 grooves. Yet, in their next round of tests, General Choi and Jang Ion encountered a new challenge. Li John sighed, speaking to the other officials. "So, in the end, cleaning is still an issue?" Another official asked. "What exactly were the results?" Li John hesitated, then explained, "Each number of grooves has its trade-offs. 6 or fewer grooves keep the power but leave a lot of residue. With 9 or more, there's less residue, but power drops." He sighed again. "So what's the answer? 9 grooves? But we lose power. 6? Then we have the residue problem." The Crown Prince, listening nearby, wondered, will they find the solution this time? Suddenly, Jong Yongaseo spoke up. "What if we spiral the grooves?" His words caught everyone's attention, including the Crown Prince, who smiled with approval. "Explain," the Crown Prince prompted. "Yes, Your Highness," Jong Yongaseo replied. "If we make the groove spiral, the length inside the barrel increases. With 6 grooves, that extra length would give the residue room to escape. And because the grooves are spiraled, the gunpowder's explosive force wouldn't be wasted." The officials, suddenly realizing, cheered. "That's it. Spiraling might be the answer." The Crown Prince immediately ordered, "Then let's test it." After multiple tests, they found an optimal design: a musket with 6 spiraled grooves, turning 1.5 times down the barrel. A voice called out, "The musket is ready for full testing." Li John eagerly directed, record and categorize every result. Seeing their enthusiasm, the Crown Prince felt immense satisfaction. They've come far. With the right guidance, these minds could achieve anything. Smiling, he thought, grow quickly, my craftsman. Soon you'll master this art. In that moment, both Lee John and Yun Aeon Su felt a sudden chill, shivering slightly. Why does it feel eerie all of a sudden? They murmured, sensing the Crown Prince's silent ambition. Mid the bustle, Lee Cho looked at the instruction sheet in confusion. What is this all about? He murmured. Noticing his bewilderment, General Choi asked, What's troubling you, sir? According to Yong Aeon Su's instructions, we didn't carve spiraled grooves into the barrels, Lee Cho replied. Yet it seems to have improved accuracy. Why would that be? The general looked thoughtful. Improving performance is good, but not knowing why is troubling. Just then, a craftsman spoke up. Could it be that the spiraled grooves make the bullets spin? What do you mean? General Choi asked, intrigued. The craftsman explained. In fletching, we angle feathers on arrows to make them spin. This helps them fly straighter and resist wind. Both Lee Cho and General Choi were astounded. They took detailed notes and prepared a report for King Chung and Ion. When the king reviewed their findings, his eyes lit up. Now I understand why the Crown Prince kept this a secret, the king remarked. If the musket's design leaked, others would steal the technique. The king ordered, Bring the forge here immediately. We must follow through with this plan. He then tossed the documents into the forge, burning them to protect the dynasty. Turning to the Crown Prince, he praised, You've worked hard, my son. This is a monumental achievement. It's all thanks to your grace, father, the Crown Prince replied humbly. The king glanced at the artisans, noting their attire. Those uniforms are interesting, he commented, recalling Area 51. Now, do you have anything else to show me? General Choi nodded. Yes, your majesty. The next is the mounted mini pistol. The king's eyes widened in surprise. A pistol? Bring it here. As he inspected the pistol, he marveled at the 6 chambers. Could this gun fire 6 shots in a row? He asked. The Crown Prince confirmed. Yes, father. The officials whispered in amazement. How did they manage that without proper tools? Proudly, the Crown Prince added, This is one of the masterpieces from Area 51. Unable to contain his excitement, the king commanded, Let's see it in action. General Choi took aim and fired 6 consecutive shots, each hitting its mark. The officials praised him, saying, That was remarkable, General. The Crown Prince felt a surge of pride as an official inspected the target. Your Highness, he reported, any enemy within 30 paces will meet their end with this power. The king, still impressed, asked, You've done well, my son. And what of the armor? The Crown Prince replied, Forgive me, father, but there's one more weapon I've yet to show you, the firebomb. The king, his curiosity piqued, followed his son to a vast, cleared field prepared for the demonstration. Seeing the setup, he asked, What kind of firebomb needs this much space? This is the newly developed firebomb, the Crown Prince announced. We call it Fai Kich Tran Tien Loi. The officials murmured excitedly. The heaven-shaking thunderbolt. Isn't that like General Tui Vu Tien's explosive cannon? Watching with satisfaction, the Crown Prince thought, true classics among classics. Late that night in Area 51, the officials debated over different prototypes, with the Crown Prince present. Which should we choose, MK1, 2 Malawian kwaches, or 2.1 Malawian kwaches? One official asked, sighing. What is MK? The Crown Prince inquired, causing the officials to exchange weary looks. One muttered under his breath, Looks like we won't be going home tonight. An official stood to explain. 1 Malawian kwacha scatters fragments upon detonation, injuring the enemy. 2 Malawian kwacha spins and spews fire in all directions, and 2.1 Malawian kwachas adds an iron plate to seal the chamber before releasing flames and shrapnel. The king patted his son on the shoulder, signaling his approval. Let us return to the palace, the king said with satisfaction. But before leaving, he turned to the Crown Prince with a glint of excitement. You've impressed me greatly today, my son. I look forward to seeing what you'll achieve next. The Crown Prince bowed deeply, feeling a sense of both relief and pride. Here we have the current armor used by the Joseon military, the Crown Prince began. The king nodded, recognizing it immediately. Yes, I'm familiar with this. The prince hesitated. However, fully equipping our soldiers with this armor has been challenging. Many soldiers, as you know, must obtain armor on their own, leading to significant differences in quality. Because of financial constraints, many end up with inferior protection. The king listened attentively, nodding thoughtfully, as did the officials standing behind, who watched his reactions closely. This is the lamellar armor, commonly used since the previous dynasty's later years. It layers silk fabric reinforced with small iron plates, offering good defense. But, the prince added, it has several drawbacks. First, it requires an immense amount of labor and time to produce. The small iron plates take time to prepare, and each one must be riveted carefully, which is labor-intensive. Second, he continued, the cost. From silk to fur, the materials are expensive. He listed more issues. Third, despite its arrow protection, it leaves some areas, like the underarms and sides, exposed weak spots in close combat. Lastly, he said, it's heavy, worn like a cloak. All its weight rests on the shoulders, making it difficult for extended wear. The king, visibly impressed by his son's thorough analysis, thought, I didn't expect him to bring up so many valid points. Finally, he asked, is there a solution? To address these issues, we've developed a new design. The prince replied, gesturing to a covered display. With a flourish, he pulled back the curtain, revealing a metal figure armored like a royal guard. Gasps filled the room. What is this? The king asked, still surprised. This, the crown prince replied respectfully, is the improved armor we've crafted to resolve the lamellar armor's shortcomings. Father, you once calculated the cost of this armor, yes. At 16 taels and 10 gen for the armor, and 4 taels and 5 gen for the helmet, the price, adjusted to today's value, is around 400,000. It's as if only nobles could afford it. I couldn't simply disregard armor for the common soldier, especially in close combat. He continued, we replaced the small iron plates with a single steel plate, providing comprehensive protection for the chest and back. The waist is reinforced with overlapping steel plates, and we've added a round plate to shield the armpits, which are vulnerable in battle. To ease the weight, the armor is now divided into two parts, the upper and lower body armor, distributing it more evenly. The lower section protects the thighs. Everyone stared, astonished. Cavalry and close combat troops would be fitted with full body armor, while musketeers and artillery soldiers would wear the lighter upper body armor. And what did the general think? Someone asked. He noted it was slightly heavier but manageable due to the weight distribution. It also covers previously exposed areas, making soldiers feel much safer. Observing the design, the crown prince allowed himself a small smile. Even though I crafted it, it's still surprising. One official, after absorbing the explanation, stepped forward. Your Highness, a question if I may? Go ahead, the prince invited. The armor and helmet are steel, correct? The official asked, carefully noting every detail. Do craftsmen have to forge each plate by hand? That sounds labor-intensive, maybe even more costly than riveted armor. A good point, the prince acknowledged. That's why I planned to use the stamping method. The officials looked confused. Stamping? The king asked, curious. Yes, father. Mass production requires stamping machines, an idea inspired by Western plate armor. Seeing it in action would make it clearer. We'll prepare a demonstration later. Not now, the king asked, intrigued. There are a few preparations left, the prince said confidently. But please review the work completed so far. An hour later, officials reported, there are no issues with the records, Your Majesty. The king nodded, satisfied. Well done, everyone. Turning to General Hasten, he added, you've worked hard as well. One official asked cautiously, is court dismissed for today? Faces lit up at the prospect of heading home, but the king announced, I want to see the armory and the process behind firearm and armor production. The officials, expecting to end their day, were caught off guard. Your Highness, it's getting late. A tour could delay court matters. The king considered this and then decided, I'll inspect it first thing tomorrow morning. The general, relieved, replied, Understood, Your Majesty. The next morning, the armory bustled with activity. The prince stood proudly beside his father. First, I'll show you the cannon-making process. Craftsmen were busy melting bronze, hammering it into shape, and intricately carving designs. The king watched, understanding the skill required to craft such pieces. I assigned specific roles to streamline the process, father, the prince explained with pride. The king praised him. Seeing it firsthand is indeed enlightening. Yes, father. I'll prepare the demonstration now, the prince said, inwardly thinking. The king must be eager to see the stamping machine. The prince picked up a loudspeaker and ordered, "Let's begin the armor production." Workers immediately got to work, showing the king the efficient production method. He watched, arms crossed, suppressing mild frustration. "Why are there so few craftsmen?" he asked. "Because we lack manpower, father." The king sighed but chose not to reprimand his son. He'll soon need to find a solution, he thought. The officials, meanwhile, whispered amongst themselves. The prince resumed, "Now we'll continue production. Strike the hammer." With expert precision, the iron bar descended, producing a remarkably sturdy piece of armor. The king's eyes lit up in amazement. With this method, mass production is possible. The prince could sense his father's growing curiosity. "Perhaps you'd like to see the gunpowder production, father?" The king hesitated, and the prince explained, "It's a complex and risky process, so we must handle it carefully." One official encouraged, "Your Majesty, perhaps you should return to the palace to rest." The king's retinue seized the opportunity. "Yes, let's head back together." As they walked, the king remarked, "The weapons in Section 51 are truly impressive. What do you all think?" One official replied, "Indeed, Your Highness. The prince's cannons and firearms are unmatched worldwide." The king, nodding thoughtfully, asked, "What would it take to produce them in large quantities?" The prince anticipated his father's interest. An official cautiously responded, "Mass production would be challenging due to limited skilled craftsmen and material supplies, especially the explosive ingredients like pig fat and beef tallow." The king considered this. "Then perhaps we can recruit skilled workers from across Joseon to assemble cannon components?" The prince cautioned, "That might risk leaking our secrets. We could pre-process components before fully assembling them." Another official added, "Tribute materials may not meet our standards." The king agreed. "Instead, we'll purchase what we need from new trading posts. This will benefit both the craftsmen and the people." Late that night, the prince awoke with an idea. The next morning, General Hai-san greeted him eagerly. "Your Highness, I have an idea as well." "You first, General," the prince invited. "No, Your Highness, please." They exchanged pleasantries until the general suggested, "What if we used soybean oil?" The prince's eyes brightened, and they both clapped in excitement. "Let's test it immediately." Soybean oil could produce glycerin, they reasoned. The general asked, "May I conduct a test shot, Your Highness?" "Go ahead, General," the prince replied, watching the general's enthusiasm. A thunderous shot rang out, echoing across the field as the general assessed the results. "With this efficiency, I believe it's ready, Your Highness," General Hai-san declared, pleased with the results. "We should inform the king immediately." From inside, the king's voice echoed, "Is that true? Excellent news. Does this mean we can begin mass production now?" The crown prince, standing below, bowed respectfully. "Yes, father," he replied. "But there is still one matter of concern." The prince's worried expression left the king puzzled. "For this batch of soybeans, we relied on the fields managed by the livestock farm on Niabo Island," the prince explained. "The soybean meal left after oil extraction makes suitable feed for cattle and pigs." The king stroked his chin thoughtfully. "But that yield alone won't be enough to meet our needs," he mused. "Correct, father. The fat, beef, and soybeans are essential resources for the people as well. If the court collects them in large quantities, it could put a strain on the populace." The king nodded, appreciating his son's consideration. "National defense is crucial, but we mustn't overlook our people's well-being. I'll reflect on this matter further." He nodded approvingly. "You've done well, Crown Prince." "Thank you, father. I humbly take my leave." As the prince left, the king remained deep in thought, weighing the best path forward. In the courtyard, the crown prince felt a flicker of anxiety as he glanced back at the closed doors of the palace. "Father, I believe you'll find a solution," he thought quietly. Later, under a bright midday sky, the officials gathered for an urgent meeting. "The boy has suggested a plan to provide pressed oil," the king announced. "Crown Prince, would you explain it to everyone?" "Yes, father," the prince said, nodding. My plan is to utilize soybean oil. I propose encouraging farmers to settle on the northern frontier to cultivate soybeans. The court would then purchase their entire yield, ensuring stability for their livelihoods. The prince's words left everyone astonished. This plan not only promised to meet the court's needs but also supported the people. The king, impressed, elaborated. In addition, we'll buy pork fat and beef tallow at fair prices. He gave careful instructions to the officials, who responded promptly, "We'll carry out your orders, your majesty." The prince looked up at his father with admiration. "Crown Prince," the king said proudly, "you've made a significant contribution." The prince bowed gratefully. "It's thanks to your guidance and the hard work of the people in Section 51. The king beamed, inspired by his son's insight. "This is but the first step in fortifying the defenses of Joseon. Proceed with utmost care. We cannot afford any mistakes." The officials, fully supportive, replied in unison, "We'll follow your command, your majesty." Meanwhile, in the north, a soldier reported to General Jean Gio, "Several new settlers have arrived, asking to work as farmers." "Good," the general replied. "Follow the standard procedures and find accommodations for them." The crown prince's influence was evident across the frontier, as local generals used golden pens gifted by the prince to manage administrative duties. Yet the workload only grew. Suddenly, a cry for help rang out nearby. "Is there anyone who can write? Please, assist me." In the bustling village square, villagers grilled ribs over an open flame. "Hold the jar. Make sure we don't lose any of the oil," someone called out, adding, "This stove was a gift from the crown prince." Watching everyone enjoy their meal, a man asked, "Can officials really eat this kind of meat?" "Currently, it's reserved for the military," someone replied. "But if you care for the soybean fields, soon you'll be able to eat like this, too. When the time comes, be sure to collect the oil carefully and deliver it to the military workshop, just as they do." Back at the palace, scattered papers filled the shelves, some fluttering as the wind drifted through the open windows. Exhausted, the crown prince lay sprawled across his bed, deep in thought about the ongoing gunpowder shortages. "Even if we fully utilize the north, it won't be enough," he muttered to himself. Suddenly, an idea struck him. The south. With reforms underway, King Sejong had started implementing policies he'd long envisioned. As time passed, on a warm summer day, the king addressed his officials. "It's time to find a husband for Princess Jong-soo, don't you think?" The announcement took the crown prince by surprise. "What? Jong-soo is getting married?" But as the arrangements began, Princess Jong-soo herself intervened, her voice pleading, "Father, I don't want this. I just want to stay with you and mother." "I understand, but marriage is a part of life," the king replied gently. Tears filled her eyes. "But I want to stay a little longer." The king sighed, a hint of reproach in his voice. "You're being stubborn, my dear." "I hate you, father," Jong-soo cried out, running from the room despite her father's attempts to calm her. The hall echoed with the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. Thanks for watching, guys. Comment Flamingo and subscribe for the next part.